Chapter 5:14. Such a loud shout caused Pu Hao, Pu Qingqing, Zhang Lingyun, and the other disciples to tremble uncontrollably. As for the few elders who had just spoken, it seemed that Elder Su was deliberately targeting them. For some reason, their faces turned pale and they actually took a step back. Their butts landed on the chair behind them, and even the chair was directly shattered as they fell to the ground. Su-yi also felt the thunderous roar in his ears. What was even more shocking was the aura that Elder Su had displayed. This was too domineering. It actually scared an elder of Xinjiang Gate to the point of falling to the ground. At this moment, Su-yi couldn't help but feel warm in his heart. No matter what, Elder Su was standing up for him. A warm feeling flowed through his heart. All the elders trembled and their gazes changed. They knew Elder Su's temper very well. Yes, outside the Sky Sword Peak's main hall, two figures appeared. The disciples at the door were shocked by the shocking scene inside the main hall and immediately bowed. The one in front was a middle-aged man. He wore a black robe with golden embroidery, outlining his muscular body. His long black hair was neatly combed into a bun. He waved his hand to signal the disciples to be silent. Listening to the movements in the main hall, his deep eyes flashed. It was the Xinjiang Gate's gate master, Situ Luyun. A gray-robed elder followed closely. Seeing this, his eyebrows twitched slightly. He was also listening to the movements in the main hall. He was the Xinjiang Gate's right protector. Immediately, Situ Muyang had a bitter smile on his face. He waved his hand and directly turned to leave quietly. The right protector also revealed a bitter smile at this moment. He signaled to the disciples with his eyes and also left with Situ Luyun. What, you have nothing to say? What sect rule did Su-yi break in the battlefield of 10,000 swords? Tell me. Elder Su directly sat on a big chair and leaned back. His cold gaze swept across the entire hall. His aura fluctuated and his voice was like thunder. The group of elders smiled bitterly. They knew best that although Su-yi was a little bold in the battlefield of 10,000 swords, as long as he didn't intentionally kill his fellow disciples in the battlefield of 10,000 swords, it didn't count as breaking the sect's rules. Furthermore, the purpose of the Battle of 1,000 Swords was to hone one's skills, and there were some rules that allowed disciples to enter the Battle of 1,000 Swords to turn a blind eye to them. Even though Su-yi had been brazen and reckless in the Battle of 1,000 Swords, it could still be a big or small matter, and it all depended on how it was handled. Logically speaking, even if Su-yi had taken all the mystical spirit fruits, it was Su-yi's own ability, and there was nothing they could say. As for robbing the inner sect disciples of their interspatial bags, this kind of thing was not uncommon in the myriad sword battlefield. Inner sect disciples robbing the outer sect disciples of their elixirs, personal disciples robbing the inner sect disciples of their interspatial bags, this was too normal. However, in every myriad sword conference, no one had ever done what Su-yi had done, robbing all the inner sect disciples of their interspatial bags, and even ambushing and robbing many personal disciples. Yu Chongqing, Shangguan Hu, Duan Yuerong, Mei Huaye and the other elders secretly smiled. Some of the elders had wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to obtain a few profound mystical spiritual fruits, but they hadn't expected Elder Su to suddenly return. This time, they could only suffer. No one is speaking? It seems like you all have nothing to say. Elder Su's gaze swept across the crowd. His voice was not soft at all as he said in a deep voice, "Then don't casually stand up for your disciples in the future. If the disciples are useless, the elders will stand up for them. This is only in Xinjiang Gate. If this was outside, Xinjiang Gate's reputation would be completely ruined by you all." The elders' eyes twitched and their faces turned green. They were elders, but they were being reprimanded at this moment. However, they were unable to refute, nor did they dare to refute. My 36th Sword Peak's disciples did not violate the sect's rules. There is no need to trouble the sect master to come here. Seeing that everyone was silent, Elder Su stood up and turned to leave the hall. At the same time, he said to Sui, "Let's go back first. In my 36th sword peak, there is nothing to be afraid of. If anyone dares to bully you, I won't be polite to them." Sui looked at Elder Su's short back and felt that he was so tall. A special feeling welled up in his heart. He did not say anything and silently followed behind. "Hee, it seems like I have nothing to do." Situ Muyang chuckled and also left. The remaining elders and protectors looked at each other in the hall. Some of them had not recovered from their shock. Looking at the short back, no one dared to say anything at this moment. The corner of Elder by Mingshan's eyes twitched. His face did not look too good. "It's okay, hee." After walking out of the hall, Situ Muyang whispered into Su Yi's ear with a smile. It seemed like, with the help of the Grandmaster, nothing happened this time. Everything was fine. "Kid, you're not bad. You didn't go there for so many years in vain. It seems like you didn't stay there for nothing." Situ Muyang's whispers naturally could not escape Elder Su's ears. He immediately turned around and rolled his eyes at Situ Muyang. However, there was some unconcealable surprise in his eyes. How could Elder Su not sense Situ Muyang's cultivation aura at this moment? With his age and cultivation, such talent was definitely rare in the entire continent. Grandmaster, I will continue to work hard and strive to defeat Su Yi. Situ Muyang smiled. In front of Elder Su, he revealed a childish smile. However, he could not help but feel a little guilty when he said that he wanted to defeat Su Yi. The more he interacted with Su Yi, the more he knew how abnormal Su Yi was. Elder Su's eyes secretly moved and fell on Su Yi again. Elder Su understood Situ Muyang's arrogant character quite well. He never admitted defeat. However, from Situ Muyang's tone, it seemed that he was extremely guilty of Su Yi. If there was not a slight difference, Situ Muyang would not admit defeat like this. Although Elder Su was shocked that Situ Muyang could reach such a level at such a young age, he could also understand. After all, the resources that Situ Muyang had received since childhood were beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Moreover, he had a good foundation that ordinary people could not compare with. However, although Su Yi was slightly older than Situ Muyang's attitude alone was enough to prove everything, not to mention everything that he had learned from Su Jiahui and Zhang Qing. Y2CU, Genuine Chapter 10 Section, Previous X1 Square Root J. Elder Su. As Elder Su was sizing up, a female voice came from inside the main hall. Elder Duan Yuerong had chased after him. "What's the matter?" Elder Su's gaze did not reveal anything. He raised his eyes slightly and said to Elder Duan Yuerong. His attitude was much better than before. Chapter 5:15. Elder Duan Yuerong gritted her teeth and said to Elder Su. She didn't want Su Yi anymore, but she didn't want to miss out on Su Jiahui. She wanted to take her in as a disciple. Elder Su looked at Elder Duan Yuerong calmly and said, "Do you think that the 36th sword peak is not as good as yours? Or do you think that the disciples of Suruga are not as good as yours?" The calmer Elder Su was, the more frightened Elder Duan Yuerong felt. She gritted her teeth and said to Elder Su, "Elder Su, that's not what I meant. It's just that the little girl is really talented and I like her. If she can become my disciple, I will teach her well and pass on my legacy." Su Yi and Situ Muyang were a little surprised, but Su Yi was not surprised. With Su Jiahui's talent, Elder Duan must have a good eye for talent. Elder Su didn't say anything, but his eyes flickered. He knew who Elder Duan Yuerong was talking about. He had seen Su Jiahui, and felt the changes in the disciples, especially Su Jiahui. He knew what it meant. If Elder Su doesn't want to, then I can't force you. Elder Duan Yuerong felt a little regretful. She really wanted to take in such a disciple and even pass on her legacy. In 2 days I will send that little girl over. Teach her well. Elder Su suddenly looked at Elder Duan Yuerong and said. As soon as he finished speaking, his aura fluctuated. He grabbed Su Yi's shoulder and flew away. Thank you, Elder Su. Su Yi felt his vision blur, and then he was already shuttling through the air and clouds. Elder Duan's happy voice came from behind him. In just a moment, Su Yi landed on the 36th Sword Peak. It's Elder Su and Su Yi. Boss is back. Greetings, Elder Su. Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, and the others immediately gathered around. Seeing that Su Yi was in good condition, their nervous expressions relaxed. After coming out of the myriad sword battlefield, go and rest. Elder Su said to everyone. Elder Su Yi had stayed in the Xinjian Gate because he wanted to thank Elder Su personally for saving his life. There's no need to say anything more. Since you've already participated in the Myriad Sword Conference, the sword pattern stones you took out should be enough to enter the final battle in 3 days. Participate well first. Elder Su waved his sleeves, indicating that Su Yi did not need to say anything more. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure disappeared. Su Yi was slightly stunned. It seemed that Elder Su did not blame him for pretending to be a Xinjian Gate disciple. He did not even say anything. Boss Su Yi, are you alright? Did the sect leader punish you? Seeing that Elder Su had left, Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, and the others dared to ask Su Yi. I didn't see the sect leader. Su Yi roughly explained the situation to everyone. He also learned from Zhang Qing that everyone had returned to the 36th Sword Peak to look for Elder Su. That was why Elder Su suddenly appeared at the Sky Sword Peak. He also learned about the situation and knew how many sword pattern stones he had taken out in the myriad sword battlefield. After that, Su Yi returned to the courtyard where he had stayed on the 36th Sword Peak. It seemed that the final battle of the Myriad Sword Conference on the Spiritual Sword Peak would be in 3 days. At dusk, the setting sun was as red as blood, and multicolored light filled the sky. Somewhere in the Sky Sword Peak, in a courtyard pavilion, smoke rose from an incense burner. How did this kid do it? Situ Luyun stood in front of the window, looking at the setting sun outside. At this moment, her eyes were full of doubts. He robbed all the inner disciples, stole all the mystical spiritual fruits, and even used the black brick to launch a sneak attack. Most importantly, the young sect leader is actually with that kid. The right protector revealed a bitter smile at this moment, mixed with shock and surprise. He said to Situ Luyun, Zhang Lingyun was defeated. The strangest thing is that with so many people, they still couldn't catch them. Instead, Elder Su suddenly returned. Otherwise, those elders would not have given up for the mystical spiritual fruit. It seems that many things still need to be investigated in the myriad sword battlefield before coming to a conclusion. Let's wait and see. Elder Su's arrival is a good thing. Situ Luyun said. The right protector smiled slightly. He knew very well that Elder Su's appearance had inadvertently helped the sect leader. Otherwise, this situation would have made things difficult for the sect leader. There are already experts who have gone to investigate the myriad sword battlefield. According to the disciples, many strange things have happened in the myriad sword battlefield this time. The right protector said. Let's talk about it after the investigation, Situ Muyang said. His eyes moved slightly, and then with some curiosity, he asked the right protector, Have you checked the sword pattern stones? 3 days later, those who will be able to ascend Lingjian Peak should be more or less the same, right? Those who will be able to ascend Lingjian Peak 3 days later are more or less the same as the disciples originally expected. However, many accidents have occurred. Speaking of this, the right protector revealed a bitter smile again. What happened? Situ Luyun asked. I just received the name list. This time, 7 people from the 36th Sword Peak have entered the top 68. Among them, the young sect leader is ranked second. Su Yi is ranked first. The remaining 5 outer disciples are all ranked within the top 20. The Right Protector said helplessly. Hearing this, the corners of Sidulyoyun's mouth could not help but twitch. At dusk, the setting sun shone. There were roars of beasts, and a deacon brought several older disciples to the 36th sword peak. They personally went up the mountain and did not dare to ride their mounts. The deacon brought the news that 7 outer disciples from Xinjian Gate had entered the top 68. 3 days later, they would go to Lingjian Peak for the final battle. We entered the top 68 when they received such news. Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, Wang Fan, Lu Ji, and Su Jiahui were ecstatic. They almost thought that they had misheard. They were so excited that they hugged each other and cried. Elder Su stood by the window of a room in the courtyard. His mind was unleashed as he listened to the activity outside. An arc of a smile was lifted on his aged and stern face. His eyes flickered, and it seemed that he was extremely excited. Elder Su, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, and the others rushed up and shouted outside the door. They seemed to want to tell Elder Su the good news. On the K section, NT in the room, Elder Su's expression suddenly changed, and his serious voice came out. I know. It's so noisy. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and prepare for the duel on the Spirit Sword Peak in 3 days. Chapter 5:16. Although Elder Su had domineeringly barged into the Sky Sword Peak this time, and brought him back to the 36th Sword Peak, Su-yi knew very well that the Divine Sword Sect would definitely not let him off easily if everything he had obtained in the battlefield of 10,000 swords was exposed. Furthermore, he had pulled the mysterious spiritual tree into the mysterious space. The Xinjian Gate would definitely not take such a precious treasure lightly. This time, he had gained a lot in the battlefield of 10,000 swords, especially the blood jade spirit ginseng that had successfully passed the tribulation. Su-yi wanted to return to the barbarian city as soon as possible to at least check on his grandfather's injuries. Phew, letting out a long sigh, Su-yi stopped thinking about it. After all, the final battle was in 3 days. Elder Su had asked him to participate in the Myriad Sword Conference. Su-yi originally had this intention. At that time, he would at least be able to face the peak younger generation of the Xinjian Gate head-on. Moreover, it was related to great opportunities and rewards. Forming a hand seal, Su-yi sat down cross-legged and began to circulate his qi to prepare for the battle in 3 days. Suddenly, Su-yi's eyes flashed and he became alert. Someone was approaching the courtyard. "Kid, follow me to the back of the mountain." A faint voice sounded. It was Elder Su's voice. Elder Su, hearing Elder Su's voice, Su-yi was quite surprised. He did not know why Elder Su was looking for him. Without much hesitation, Su-yi pushed open the door and left. At this moment, the sun had already set and the sky was gradually darkening. A new moon appeared in the sky. Su-yi was no stranger to the back of the mountain. When he wanted to secretly leave the Xinjian Gate, he had walked through the back of the mountain and finally met the mysterious beautiful woman and Mu Yao. The back of the mountain was quiet and deep. Su-yi saw from afar that Elder Su was standing on a huge boulder in a spacious area under the cover of night. Elder Su stood with his hands behind his back and his eyes slightly raised as if he was looking into the distance. 7 latest 3 new G chapter section OC on JB. Greetings, Elder Su. Su-yi stepped forward and bowed respectfully. Based on your performance at the Xinjian Gate and the Myriad Sword battlefield, you might have some background. Tell me, where are you from? Elder Su asked Su-yi without turning his head. I, Su-yi, come from a remote barbarian city. I don't belong to any sect, so I wouldn't dare to hide anything from Elder Su, Su-yi replied. His eyes were calm, and what he said was the truth. If you don't belong to any sect, where did your cultivation come from? Elder Su turned his head, his long robes fluttering in the wind. His hair was enveloped by the moonlight, causing the silvery strands of his hair to be even more eye-catching. His eyes were filled with a hint of sharpness as he stared at Su Yi. Elder Su already knew about Su Yi's incident at the Xinjian Gate. How could such a youth belong to no sect? My talent was mediocre, and I had 4 attributes. Someone once said that I only had the talent to do odd jobs. I was not blessed by the heavens and was heavily injured in the barbarian demon forest. If not for Elder Su's help, I would have died long ago. Su Yi replied. Although he was grateful to Elder Su, he still had to be cautious. Naturally, he could not say too much about the mysterious space. Your 4 attributes seem to be earth, water, fire, and wind, right? Hearing this, Elder Su's eyebrows twitched. Elder Su had treated Su Yi's injuries, so he still remembered that Su Yi had 4 attributes. At that time, he also clearly felt that Su Yi's body was all kinds of extraordinary. The Dantian's chi vortex was much wider than that of ordinary cultivators of the same level. The strength of his body was even comparable to that of a demon clan's cub. These could not escape Elder Su's inspection. Therefore, Suruga also felt that it was strange. Originally, a boy with 4 attributes, and the attributes countered each other. Normally, his talent was ordinary, but everything about him was abnormal. Yes. Su Yi nodded and smiled bitterly. However, Su Yi did not care about his qualifications as a servant. So what if he had the qualifications to be a servant? At least among his peers, he had never met an opponent that he could not defeat. 4 attribute. Among your 4 attributes, although one of them is wind, 2 of the other 3 attributes countered each other. Your talent is indeed ordinary, but there are always exceptions. As long as you experience enough training, you can stimulate your endless potential. There are thousands of forms in the mortal world, and if you choose one of the 3,000 Tao of heaven and earth, you can achieve something. In this world, there are rumors that people have entered the Tao with their bodies, and there are also people who have entered the Tao with their swords. Although it is said that people who can succeed in this way are as rare as carps passing through the Dragon Gate, but they do exist. Perhaps you will be one of them in the future. Elder Su looked at Su Yi and said, the fierceness in his eyes calming down a lot. Disciple will continue to work hard. Su Yi nodded. Elder Su's words had greatly encouraged him. Su Yi still remembered that when Elder Ingdang of the 35th Sword Peak was teaching in the Sword Hall, he had also said the same words. Talent was very important, but it was not absolute. I don't want to know too much about your origins. I saved you purely by coincidence. You can consider it as your fate not fated to end. Elder Su said. Suddenly, his eyes became serious and fierce. He looked at Su Yi and said, but you should remember that if you break the law in the future and become an evil person, I, Suruga, can save you and kill you with my own hands. Disciple will listen to your teachings and keep them in mind. Su Yi bowed respectfully, his eyes full of respect. Well, there is no need to be restrained. Looking at Su Yi, Elder Su could also feel that Su Yi's attitude was correct, neither servile nor overbearing. Although the news he got from Xinjian Gate said that this kid was treacherous and arrogant, Elder Su had his own judgment in his heart. With such nature, he was afraid that he would not become an evil person. Especially when he felt that Su Yi was upright and had a good nature, Elder Su liked him a little more. I pretended to be a disciple of Xinjian Gate. Please forgive me, Elder Su. Su Yi said. No matter what, he pretended to be a disciple of Xinjian Gate. You are not pretending. Now you have the Xinjian Gate badge, so you are already a disciple of Xinjian Gate. If you want to leave in the future, you can leave by yourself. Elder Su said. Thank you very much, Elder Su. Su Yi was grateful. He heard from Zhang Qing and others that Elder Su was extremely unapproachable. Ordinary disciples did not dare to get close to him. But at this moment, Su Yi felt that Elder Su was not such a person. He was not as unapproachable as the rumors said. 3 days later, we will have the final battle on Lingjian Peak. How confident are you? Elder Su looked at Su-yi and asked. This, Su-yi hesitated for a moment. With a little smile on his face, he said to Elder Su, I don't dare to have any confidence. Just do your best. Chapter 5:17. This kid said that he was not confident, but his expression clearly showed that he was confident. This kid was really like the rumors in the sect. It seemed that he was somewhat arrogant. Among this batch of disciples there are a few decent ones. Each of them has their own trump cards and won't be easy to deal with. Elder Su sized up Su-yi and seemed to have seen through Su-yi. He said, You have a sword on your back. How much do you know about swords? I really don't know much about swords. Su-yi smiled bitterly. Speaking of which, he had only truly come into contact with swords after arriving at Xinjian Gate. His first lesson was in the sword hall. He had benefited a lot from listening to Elder Ingdang's teachings. Is that so? Elder Su raised his eyebrows slightly and said to Su-yi, How about this? Go all out and try to attack me with the sword moves that you're good at. Elder Su, that's not very good. Hearing that, Su-yi was slightly stunned. As he spoke, he took out an interspatial bag from his chest and held a sword that was at the level of a spirit weapon tightly in his hand. Su-yi had already forgotten whose interspatial bag he got the sword from. In any case, he got it from one of the direct disciples' interspatial bags. Elder Su asked him to attack. It was clear that he wanted to test him. If he was happy and taught him a move or two, he would have profited greatly. How could Su-yi miss such an opportunity? Looking at Su-yi's actions, Elder Su's eyes twitched in confusion. This kid said that it was not very good, but he was holding the sword in his hand. He probably had some ulterior motives. He knew how to climb up the ladder. He was indeed a bit like the rumors about him being treacherous and cunning. Go ahead. There's no need to hold back. Go all out. Elder Su said faintly. He had heard many rumors and was very shocked. At this moment, he wanted to test whether those rumors were true or false. Elder Su, please forgive my rudeness. Su-yi chuckled. When his voice fell, he secretly took a deep breath, and the expression on his face suddenly became calm. Su-yi didn't know how strong Elder Su was. However, Su-yi could feel that this Elder Su in front of him was definitely one of the strongest people he had ever met. Based on the aura and attitude of the elders in the Sky Sword Peak, it was not difficult for Su-yi to know how powerful Elder Su was. At this moment, Elder Su was intentionally probing him. Su-yi also hoped that an expert like Elder Su would be able to teach him a move or two. Therefore, Su-yi was very nervous and had to do his best. Su-yi was worried that if he didn't perform well enough, Elder Su would look down on him. At that time, Elder Su wouldn't have the desire to guide him anymore. Huff, secretly exhaling, Su-yi circulated the yuan qi within his body. His eyes gradually closed as he raised the sword in his hand to his shoulder. An invisible aura instantly gushed out from his body. Boom! The surrounding space faintly trembled as Su-yi's robes fluttered slightly. The dust and gravel on the ground rolled as a scarlet yuan qi glow instantly surged out from his body. It brought with it a blazing aura and a dignified aura, as if flames were churning. Under the impact of the invisible aura, Elder Su's eyes abruptly flickered, before astonishment and shock appeared within them. 5th level origin spirit stage. Sensing the cultivation aura from Su-yi's body, Elder Su was already sufficiently shocked. With Su-yi's age and cultivation, it was already very shocking. However, what truly shocked Elder Su was the aura emanating from Su-yi's body. With his eyesight, how could he not feel that this aura was the most terrifying? There was also Su-yi's invisible aura. Although his eyes were slightly closed, there was clearly a kind of sword essence aura. Light involuntarily flickered in Elder Su's eyes. He was too astonished. Didn't this brat say that he didn't understand the sword? Yet, he had clearly comprehended a sword intent. However, with his age and origin spirit stage cultivation, it was impossible for him to comprehend sword intent. Sword intent, how was that possible? That was a realm that countless swordsmen dreamed of. This realm had nothing to do with cultivation, but came from the Tao of the sword. Amongst origin emperor stage swordsmen, if they could comprehend their own sword intent, they would already be considered geniuses. How could the cultivation of the essence spirit realm possibly reach such heights? One had to know that sword intent was an extension of the source. This source belonged only to the sword, and was the source of the sword. Sword intent was the unity of form, spirit, emotion, and reason. It was the coordination of the real and the illusory. It was born out of an accident and contained within an image. Comprehending sword intent was a legendary realm. It was an unprecedented realm of comprehension towards the sword, and was known as sword intent. Elder Su couldn't believe it. He was shocked, and his eyes glowed. However, the more he sensed, the more shocked Elder Su became. Elder Su could feel that the invisible aura emanating from Su Yi's body was definitely different. Even with Elder Su's current eyesight, it was difficult for him to determine whether Su Yi had comprehended sword intent. However, Elder Su was certain that the young man before him and his sword were no longer just sword moves. Instead, there was a sword aura that emanated an invisible aura. It seems a little like that. Elder Su's eyes flickered as he recalled a mural in Divine Sword Cliff. At that moment, Su Yi's posture seemed to be exactly the same as the sword move on the mural. However, no one seemed to have comprehended the sword move on the mural. Buzz! Soon, a sharp aura gradually fluctuated from the sword in Su Yi's hand. It was accompanied by the faint sound of wind and thunder. Clanging sounds were heard and the brilliance filled the air. Unspecified currency dollar, chi. It was also at this moment that Su Yi's tightly shut eyes suddenly opened. 2 rays of sword light flashed out from the depths of his eyes. At the same time, an otherworldly aura, accompanied by an enormous pressure, spread out from his body. Swoosh! Su Yi attacked. He stabbed out with the sword in his hand. In an instant, the sword light was dazzling. Red vital chi condensed into a sword light. With a sharp sound, it flew towards Elder Su. Elder Su's eyes flickered. When the sword light was in front of him, he waved his long sleeves. A gust of energy swept out from his sleeves and collided with the sword light. The sword light dissipated and disappeared without a trace. Deng deng, there was not much movement, but Su Yi's feet brushed against the ground as he retreated in a straight line. After a few steps, he finally stabilized his body. This, Su Yi was surprised. He had used all his strength, but Elder Su had only waved his sleeves. The difference was too great. Compared to Su Yi, Elder Su was far more shocked than Su Yi. It's barely passable. At your cultivation and age, it's not bad. Chapter 518. P-Head F Send W. At this moment, Elder Su was the only one who knew the shock in his heart. That sword move just now, putting aside the cultivation base, at least the cultivation base of the Origin Void stage, would be difficult to perform. And the sword move that this kid had comprehended, although it had not yet reached the level of true sword intent, it was already at the entry level. The sword momentum had been formed, and to comprehend the true sword intent, only an opportunity was needed. This opportunity may be close at hand, or it may take a long time, or even a lifetime without being able to obtain this opportunity. But what Elder Su could be sure of was that this kid in front of him was absolutely intelligent, and his comprehension ability was as rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. And Su Yi had not been in Shenjian Gate for long, yet he had already comprehended the sword momentum. But it could be felt that his basic skills were very sloppy. Disciples' basic skills are indeed sloppy. In 3 days, I will go to Lingjian Peak to fight with those well-known figures in Xinjian Gate. Otherwise, I would ask Elder Su to teach me a thing or two. I would be very grateful. Su-yi looked at Elder Su's expression, and his eyes secretly turned, wanting to see if he could let Elder Su know a thing or two about himself. It seemed that just now Elder Su was not very satisfied with him, and he did not know if he could get Elder Su's guidance. Kid, don't be so glib. What kind of person was Elder Su? How could he not see Su-yi's thoughts? He said lightly. Although I have nothing to do these days, I don't have the time to teach you. Xinjian Gate's foundation of sword, although it is only the basics of using the sword, is very suitable for you now. You can go look for it. Foundation of sword, I have it. Su-yi fumbled in his space bag for a while and found the foundation of sword that he had obtained from the senior disciple under Elder Ingdang's order. This foundation of sword was only the basics of using the sword. Su-yi had flipped through it, but he had been in the battlefield of 10,000 swords all this time, so he did not have time to carefully read and practice it. It's best if you have it. You can practice it well. Don't underestimate these basics. Elder Su's voice fell, and with a sweep of his long sleeve, he immediately left. Looking at Elder Su's figure disappearing into the night sky, Su-yi's expression was somewhat regretful. It seemed that his performance had not satisfied Elder Su's disinclined to teach him. Foundation of sword. Su-yi held the basics of sword in his hand. This was not a martial technique, but a basic entry skill that every disciple of the divine sword sect had. Every disciple, or even a servant disciple, everyone, they all had a set foundation. Then let's practice the foundation. After a while, Su-yi's eyes were filled with determination. Anyway, he had nothing to do these 3 days, so he could maintain his peak state at any time. It was just the right time to practice the foundation of sword. Su-yi had always been very clear about the principle of building a skyscraper from the ground. Although he had practiced a few sets of sword techniques, the foundation of sword was indeed sloppy and ordinary. Night fell, the new moon hung high in the sky, and the forest was serene and quiet. Su-yi flipped through the foundation of sword and memorized it in his heart. He held the sword in his hand tightly and swung it continuously. Whoosh whoosh! The sword swung without any fluctuation of primordial qi. Su-yi only swung the sword in the most simple way, straight stab, horizontal slash on the foundation of sword. The foundation of sword was mainly divided into piercing sword, hacking sword, lifting sword, hanging sword, cloud sword, pointing sword, collapsing sword, intercepting sword, etc. Although Su-yi had practiced with the broken sword on his back, it was not as detailed as the foundation of sword. Under the moonlight, in the silent forest, Su-yi held the sword and practiced the foundation of sword again and again. Far away on a mountain peak, a short figure was watching. There was a flash of light in his eyes under the moonlight. In a simple courtyard, the side hall was simple but had an antique flavor. Situmuyang had changed into a clean black silk robe. He was not old, but he was not short. His black hair was combed and his face was handsome. His eyes were clear and he looked very amiable. However, only the disciples of the Xinjian Gate who had experienced the battlefield of 10,000 swords would know that this amiable young man, who looked like a little brother next door, was ruthless when it came to smashing the black brick and plundering the space bags. You and Su-yi worked together to get the profound spirit tree. Where is it now? Situ Luyun looked at Situmuyang. He had already received news that the profound spirit tree had disappeared from the battlefield of 10,000 sword. We got the profound spirit fruit. We don't know anything else, Situmuyang replied. He had promised Su-yi that he would give Su-yi access to that special space, and he had even received great benefits from it. Naturally, he would not say anything. You! Situ Luyun glared at his son. Did this kid know what it meant to help outsiders? He was the young master of the Xinjiang Gate. Father, there are no rules in the myriad sword battlefield to speak of. Everything that we have the ability to obtain is our own luck and fortune. Otherwise, why would you let me go in to temper myself? Situ Muyang faintly said to Situ Luyun as the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. You can get everything, but a treasure like the profound spirit tree was not uprooted by you. Situ Luyun glared at Situ Muyang. It was fine that all the profound spirit fruit had been taken, but the profound spirit tree could not be touched. Don't be so fierce to me. Otherwise, I'll go back to my mother and tell her that you don't treat me well and that you don't want to come back. Seeing that his father was about to flip out, Situ Muyang raised his eyebrows and said in a faint voice, You! Situ Luyun's eyes almost popped out of their socket. It was clear that he was somewhat afraid. Dad, I'm just joking. I've been thinking about you every day for the past few years. I've also gained quite a lot from the battlefield of 10,000 swords this time. I believe that my mother will be very happy. When the time comes, I'll put in a good word for you. Who knows, maybe she'll come back. Situ Muyang's gaze turned as he smiled intimately at Situ Luyun. Really? Hearing this, Situ Luyun's gaze instantly wavered, but immediately after, his expression became serious again. He patted the back of Situ Muyang's head. His expression seemed to be strict, but his tone was already much gentler. He said, Don't give me that. Quickly tell me what happened in the battlefield of 1,000 swords. What kind of opportunity did you obtain? With Situ Luyun's strictness, how could he not see the transformation on his son's body? In the short span of a month, Situ Muyang had directly advanced from the second level of the Origin Spirit stage to the late fourth level of the Origin Spirit stage. Such a rapid breakthrough, yet his aura was as stable as a boulder. This was definitely not ordinary. Most importantly, Situ Luyun could sense that Situ Muyang's body had undergone a transformation from the inside out. It was as if his bones had been cleansed and his marrow had been cleansed. Chapter 519. Nothing much happened. Those so-called direct disciples of the Xinjiang Gate, even those ranked at the top of the Sword Pagoda, are just SOSO. Situ Muyang shook his head. His young face was filled with confidence. Situ Luyun's gaze twitched. He knew very well how strong and talented the direct disciples of the Xinjiang Gate's Sword Pagoda were. Each and every one of those disciples was a proud son of heaven. But at this moment they were actually looked down upon by someone. And this person was his own son. This made him feel very helpless. This time, Situ Luyun was originally a little worried that with Situ Muyang's personality, he would not care about the direct disciples of the Xinjiang Gate and would suffer a lot in the end. But if he told Situ Luyun's identity in advance, he would lose the purpose of tempering himself in the myriad sword battlefield. But in the end, when Situ Luyun found out, he could not help but be somewhat dumbfounded. It was really hard to say whether this kid had gained face for him or brought shame to him. Smashing the black brick, snatching the space bag, being surrounded by tens of thousands of Xinjiang Gate disciples and still being able to escape. If he had not already received confirmation of this, he would not have dared to believe it. However, Situ Luyun also understood his son's talent. This time, his cultivation had once again soared in the myriad sword battlefield. With his current cultivation and strength, he could really fight against those extraordinary fellows who were ranked at the top of the sword pagoda. But this time, I did obtain a lot of opportunities in the myriad sword battlefield. But if it were not for Sui, I would not have been able to obtain those opportunities. Situ Muyang said to Situ Luyun with a serious expression. Then, he took out a jade box from his space bag and handed it to Situ Luyun. Situ Luyun's eyes moved. He opened the jade box and a mystical spiritual fruit with a medicinal fragrance and multicolored light appeared before his eyes. Q initial end haired this. How could Situ Luyun not recognize the mystical spiritual fruit? But when he looked at the mystical spiritual fruit in front of him, he could not help but feel astonished. This mystical spiritual fruit was obtained from the myriad sword battlefield? After which, Situ Luyun turned to Situ Muyang and asked, how could he not see that the mystical spiritual fruit in the myriad sword battlefield was different from this one? Even with the naked eye, he could tell that this mystical spiritual fruit was much stronger than the one in the myriad sword battlefield. This is the mystical spirit fruit from the myriad sword battlefield. Its medicinal efficacy should have increased by quite a bit. Situ Muyang nodded. Improved the efficacy of the medicine. Situ Luyun's eyes lit up. This mystical spirit fruit had not only increased its medicinal efficacy, but it seemed to be on a much higher level compared to ordinary mystical spirit fruit. At the same time, Situ Luyun was even more flabbergasted. Originally, he had felt that Situ Muyang's cultivation had soared. Perhaps it was because he hadn't listened to him and had directly eaten the profound spirit fruit. However, from the looks of it, Situ Muyang did not consume the mystical spirit fruit. Instead, he had obtained another fortuitous encounter. This fortuitous encounter seemed to be closely related to Su-yi. A new space has appeared in the myriad sword battlefield. Do you know about it? Situ Luyun's gaze flickered. It was unknown what he was thinking about, but he immediately asked Situ Muyang again. Su-yi and I were the first to enter. We almost died. It was Su-yi who saved us. Situ Muyang replied. What's inside? Situ Luyun's gaze flickered. He was the clearest about what kind of place the myriad sword battlefield was. Everything that had appeared there, and even escaped the search of the experts of the Xinjian Gate. It was definitely extraordinary. There are quite a few spiritual herbs and barbaric demonic beasts. Other than that, I didn't discover anything special. Situ Muyang's gaze flickered. He had concealed the matter of the enormous divine bird's skeleton. He could sense that in the end, Su-yi and the divine bird's skeleton had disappeared. However, Su-yi trusted him greatly. Knowing his identity, he had also revealed his heaven-shaking secret. So Situ Muyang didn't want to cause trouble for Su-yi. Looking at Situ Muyang's expression, Situ Luyun's expression flickered. It was unknown whether he believed him or doubted him. He continued, when the exit opened there was a tribulation. I heard that you and Su-yi were nearby. What happened? We also didn't know. Suddenly, heavenly lightning fell. If we hadn't fled quickly, we would have suffered a calamity. Situ Muyang had a lingering fear, but his expression didn't reveal any trace. The matter of the blood jade spirit ginseng's tribulation was naturally not something that could make things difficult for Su-yi. Looking at Situ Muyang, Situ Luyun calmly stared at him for a moment. His expression had an unfathomable feeling. If there's nothing else, I'll leave first. In 3 days, I still have to fight with the direct disciples of the Xinjian Gate. I have to prepare. Situ Muyang faced his own father, somewhat lacking in confidence. Go. Be careful in 3 days. Although your cultivation base has improved a lot, the disciples who can go to the Spirit Sword Peak in 3 days won't be easy to deal with. Situ Luyun returned the jade box containing the mysterious spirit fruit to Situ Muyang. He waved his sleeve, indicating that he should leave. Don't worry, I'm not someone to be trifled with. Remember what you promised me. If I can do it, then when the time comes, you can't stop me from going to the Spirit Sword Peak with you. Situ Muyang put away the jade box. His eyes were filled with confidence as he happily left. Watching Situ Muyang leave, Situ Luyun's gaze continued to sink into contemplation. I didn't expect the young master's progress to be so astonishing. It seems that in 3 days on the Spirit Sword Peak, he will amaze the world. A voice was heard, and an old man walked over. Situ Luyun slightly raised his eyes and asked the old man, "How much of this kid's words do you think is true?" I don't know how much is true or false, but I can be sure that the relationship between the young master and that kid Sue-yi is exceptionally good. Everything that happened in the battlefield of 10,000 swords might have been done by the two of them together. Perhaps they are helping that kid Sue-yi to hide something. The old man wore a gray robe and had an amiable expression. His bright eyes emitted a bright light, giving people a feeling of shrewdness. It was the right protector. The mysterious spirit fruit, the mysterious spirit tree, the open space, and the item to pass the tribulation. It seems that all of this is related to these two kids, Situ Luyun lightly said. It seems that the sect master already has some plans in his heart? The right protector looked at Situ Luyun. Based on his understanding of the sect master should have some plans in his heart. The Myriad Sword Conference is in 3 days. I want to see just how far that kid can go. As for other matters, let's talk about them after 3 days. Situ Luyun's eyes were filled with anticipation, and there was a hidden light in them. The night was hazy, and the night wind was cool and refreshing. Xinjian Gate was filled with exotic flowers and rare herbs. The faint fragrance from afar refreshed the mind. Humph! Chapter 520. Hiss! A 9-hell snake cub flicked its tongue. Its entire body was black, and its head was as ferocious as a dragon's. Its pale golden eyes glowed faintly, and its pair of black wings expanded slightly, emitting a faint black light. It seemed to have sensed Mu Yao's resentment and was very docile and affectionate. Let's see how that kid will hide in 3 days. Mu Yao clenched her teeth as she stroked the 9-hell snake cub's head that was as ferocious as a dragon's head. She had been chasing after Sue-yi in the Myriad Sword battlefield, not only for the battle back then, but also for the mystical spiritual fruit. How could she not be angry that Sue-yi had managed to escape in the few times that they had met? Boom! Hearing Mu Yao's words, the 9-hell snake cub flapped its wings, and a mighty aura spread out from its body. It hissed and flicked its tongue, as if it wanted to stand up for Mu Yao. Your cultivation is still not high enough. That kid has some skills, and you are still not his match. When you grow into a real 9-hell snake one day, you will be able to swallow that kid alive. Mu Yao stroked the 9-hell snake cub's ferocious head, and a faint smile appeared in her eyes. Master has said before that there is always someone better than you. Do you believe me now? A voice was heard, and a beautiful woman dressed in plain clothes quietly appeared. Her figure was exquisite under her plain long skirt, and her beautiful black hair was tied up into a flowing cloud bun. There was a jade hairpin in the bun, and she looked elegant yet luxurious. Master! Looking at the beautiful woman Sue-yi, Mu Yao immediately pouted and said softly, "This was just an accident. In terms of true strength, he will definitely lose. In the Myriad Sword battlefield, everything depends on strength. There are no accidents or coincidences." There was a smile in the plain-clothed woman's eyes. Her bright eyes were deep and dark, and it seemed as if they could make one sink into them. She smiled at Mu Yao, a doting look in her eyes as she said, "That little fellow was able to obtain the mysterious spirit fruit and so many sword rune stones. This proves that he did not rely on an accident. He will be a true opponent for you." Mu Yao raised her eyebrows and gritted her teeth. She gave a low snort and pouted, I'll make him hand over the mystical spiritual fruit in 3 days. Otherwise, I won't be so courteous." The night was like a curtain in the sky. The new moon hung diagonally in the sky, and the stars twinkled. On the mountain peak, a young man in white stood tall and straight. Under the dim moonlight, his black eyes shone with a dazzling light. The young man was Yunling Feng, who was ranked second in the Sword Pagoda. However, at this moment, Yunling Feng didn't look too good. Not being able to obtain the mysterious spirit fruit is a pity, but there will be opportunities to make up for it in the future. However, no accidents can happen in this 1,000-sword conference, as this matter is of the utmost importance. Are you confident in the duel in 3 days? An old man spoke, his eyes shining brightly. It was Elder Bai Mingshan. After preparing for so long, I also want to see how Ryugan River has improved over the years. Back then, I lost to him so that he would let down his guard. I have prepared for so long for the duel in 3 days. Yun Lingfeng spoke, a fierce light flashing in his eyes. 3 days later, there is no room for mistakes. Also, there is one more person who may be your greatest threat. Elder Bai Mingshan said. Although Su Yi is somewhat capable, he is only relying on his ability to subdue brute demon beasts. He is still not enough to be my true opponent. Yun Lingfeng said in a deep voice. When he thought of that brat, there was an indescribable anger in his heart. Z/update, fastest update, cool you craftsman, K-net, a brat that Elder Su had brought into the Xinjiang Gate from God knows where had actually made him suffer in the myriad sword battlefield. However, that brat only had some unorthodox skills. In Elder Bai Mingshan's heart, that brat was not a true opponent. That brat is not simple. His performance in the heavenly platform was too dazzling. You have to be careful. However, there is one person you have to pay attention to this time, and it is not him. Elder Bai Mingshan knew that Su Yi was not simple. However, he knew his own disciple the best. At least, that brat Su Yi was not enough to be his disciple's true opponent for the time being. He said to Yun Lingfeng, "You have to pay attention to that girl called Mu Yao. Her background is not simple." Mu Yao. Yun Lingfeng's eyes moved slightly. How could he not know her? There was no ranking in the Sword Pagoda. Her strength had always been a mystery. However, he did not care about that. When he mentioned her name, there was a fluctuation in his heart. A graceful figure in orange appeared in his mind. However, she was the disciple of Elder Ouyang. She was obviously in front of him, but he could not reach her. That girl's background is mysterious. She was brought into the Xinjiang Gate by Elder Ouyang. In the entire Xinjiang Gate, I am afraid that only the sect leader knows her identity. Elder Bai Mingshan frowned slightly. There were some things that even he, an elder, did not know. The night was hazy. However, the Divine Sword sect was unusually lively. The list of the 68 disciples who were qualified to set foot on Lingjian Peak for the final battle 3 days later had been announced, which shocked the entire Xinjiang Gate. All the inner disciples and pro-disciples of this year were still immersed in shock. No one had expected that Su Yi would be the first, Situ Muyang would be the second, and Mu Yao would be the third. Before this, no one would have thought that these 3 names would occupy the top 3 of the 68 spots. And among the top 20, there were outer disciples such as Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and Lu Ji, which surprised people. Su Yi and Situ Muyang robbed so many people and collected a lot of sword pattern stones. Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and Lu Ji are all disciples of the 36th sword peak like Su Yi. The sword pattern stones must be from Su Yi. Some people speculated that the strength of Su Yi and Situ Muyang was beyond doubt, but Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and others must have gotten the sword pattern stones for free, which was why they occupied several places among the 68 places. In the final battle 3 days later, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and others will not be opponents. Some disciples said, "I heard that Situ Muyang is the son of the sect leader and has only recently returned to the Xinjiang Gate. No wonder Situ Muyang is so young, but his cultivation is already so strong. There is a disciple called Mu Yao. I don't think I've heard of her before. I've seen Mu Yao before. She subdued an 8-winged demonic python in the battlefield of 10,000 swords. She is very strong. Among the 68 places this time, she is ranked 3rd, only below Su Yi and Situ Muyang. I accidentally heard that this Mu Yao is very mysterious in the sect." As the disciples walked out of the battlefield of 10,000 swords, the 68 places were announced. Situ Muyang, Mu Yao, and some other outstanding disciples immediately became the focus of everyone's attention. Some were happy while others were sad. Many direct disciples, such as Pu Qingqing and Pu Hao, cursed in their hearts. Chapter 521. But because of Su Yi and Situmuyang, they missed the opportunity. How could they not feel aggrieved? But at this moment, the happiest person in the Xinjian gate was none other than Ho Changming. Protector Ho Changming, his new disciple, Zhang Qing, not only managed to enter the top 68, he even managed to enter the top 20. This inconceivable miracle had actually happened. Ha 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 ha! In the courtyard residence, Ho Changming couldn't help laughing. When he thought of the expressions of Wang Tianbao and Zhu Changgao when they finally knew the result, he felt very happy. This time, he won a lot of high-rank star-grade elixirs, which were enough to make Ho Changming's value dozens of times. The most important thing was that he could make those protectors speechless, which made Ho Changming feel very happy. "Master, what are you laughing at?" Seeing this, a disciple felt very strange. His master, who always looked serious, was very abnormal today. "Nothing. By the way, go and clean a room. Your junior brother will come in a few days. You must clean it up," Ho Changming said with a smile. His new disciple broke into the top 20, which made him unprecedentedly in the limelight. Thinking about it, he was very excited. "Well, I'll go now." The disciple nodded and was also very happy. His junior brother broke into the top 68 and made the limelight. This made his senior brother, who had never seen him, feel proud. "Wang Tianbao, I'm not finished with you." "Zhu Changgao, did you discuss it? You cheated us of so many elixirs." At this moment, in the middle of the night, Wang Tianbao and Zhu Changgao were still surrounded by a group of protectors. One by one, the protectors were incomparably indignant. Everyone had lost. Although 10 high-grade star-grade medicinal pills were not enough to bankrupt these protectors, when these protectors carefully thought about it, all of this seemed to be a scam. They suspected that all of this had been discussed by Zhu Zhanggao, Protector Wang Tianbao and Protector Ho Changming. We really didn't know. Who knew that an outer disciple could really break into the top 68? At this moment, Wang Tianbao and Zhu Zhanggao, the two enforcers, were crying miserably. They were even more wronged than Do Yi. Who would have thought that Ho Changming's luck would be so good? An outer disciple actually broke into the top 68. This was an inconceivable miracle. On EB or Square Root Cool Craftsman, when they confirmed the news, they were all dumbfounded. The night passed. Su Yi was bathed in the light of dawn. He brandished the sword in his hand, slashing diagonally. His movements were simple, but he repeated them over and over again until he was dripping with sweat. After resting for 2 hours and adjusting his breathing, Su Yi continued to practice the basics of the sword. This continued until dusk. After sweating profusely again, Su Yi continued to rest and recover. The movements were simple, and he practiced them over and over again. Although it was extremely boring, Su Yi knew that these basic skills would be of great use to him. Night once again covered the sky, and the new moon hung high in the sky. Huff huff, Su Yi continued to practice the basics, repeating the simple movements over 10,000 times. The basics are very important. Don't underestimate a sword. A faint voice came, and a short figure appeared not far away, slowly walking over. It was Elder Su. Elder Su. Su Yi stopped practicing and held the sword in his hand. There was a look of surprise in his eyes. Elder Su actually came. Elder Su didn't pay much attention to him, and went straight to Su Yi. He reached out his hand and took the sword from Su Yi's hand. With a flick of his wrist, the sword body shook. Instantly, the sword began to move. It was either a stab, a flick, a point, or a slash. At the same time, he said, the sword has to be piercing, slashing, lifting, slashing, stirring, and washing. The stab has to be swift and violent, the point has to be straightforward, the belt has to be sharp, the swipe has to be flexible, the draw has to be steady, the hang has to be close, the strike has to be majestic, the flick has to be pulled, and the cut has to be on the wrist. When the last word was said, Elder Su's hand movements also stopped, and he threw the sword back to Su-yi. "Thank you, Elder Su, for your guidance." Su-yi received the sword, and he was a little excited. This was clearly Elder Su guiding him. "I'm not in the mood to guide you. I'm just bored. Continue practicing." Elder Su glanced at Su-yi and then sat down not far away. He said to Su-yi, "I have nothing to do anyway. You can continue practicing." "Yes." Su-yi chuckled and continued practicing. The treasured sword in his hand was either chopping, stabbing, or flipping. It was dull and tedious, but Su-yi did not slack off in the slightest. He was completely immersed in it. Elder Su's gaze flickered for a moment before returning to normal. As the saying goes, the saber is like a ferocious tiger and the sword is like the wind. You know how to use a saber, but you should know that a sword and a saber are not the same. To practice the sword, you need to train your eyes. Sword moves all rely on your eyes. Your eyes are as sharp as lightning. It was unknown when Elder Su had started speaking. Su-yi was immersed in his practice. With Elder Su's guidance, he became more and more serious. Another night passed, and Su-yi stopped sweating profusely. He planned to rest for a while before continuing. "Thank you, Elder Su." Su-yi arrived in front of Elder Su and bowed respectfully. "Looking at your basic skills, they are really sloppy and ordinary. You said you came from a barbarian city. Is it the barbarian city at the end of the barbarian demon forest?" Elder Su's gaze was calm as he looked at Su-yi. But at this moment, Elder Su's heart was still shaken. This kid's comprehension ability was not ordinary. It was simply abnormal. Even if he only gave a slight reminder, this kid would be able to draw inferences and connect the dots. Elder Su had been observing for a day and a night. He did not know why, but he could not help but run out and say a few words. With Elder Su's eyesight, how could he not see that Su-yi did not look like he had a teacher? Many of his basic skills were sloppy and ordinary, but his cultivation and age made him secretly shocked. Su-yi's talent was not ordinary. At such a young age, he had already reached such a level. He suppressed many direct disciples of the Shunjian Gate. However, he did not have any arrogance. He was also tenacious in the boring basic skills. This made Elder Su's heart move. If this kind of youth was given guidance, his future would be limitless in the future. "Yes, I came from a barbarian city." Su-yi nodded and did not hide anything. "It's not easy for a youngster like you to come out from such a remote place. Your talent is ordinary, but you have your own talent. It's not easy. Remember, you have to progress step by step in the future," Elder Su said in a calm tone. Su-yi nodded and listened carefully. "I can feel that some of your other basic skills are also very sloppy and ordinary. Could it be that you have never cultivated when you were young?" Chapter 522. When I was young, there was a small problem with my body that prevented me from cultivating. 4 years ago, by chance, I was able to embark on the path of cultivation. Su-yi bitterly smiled. At that time, he didn't know why he couldn't cultivate. Later, he found out that it was because of the mysterious space in his body that he couldn't store yuan qi. Calculating the time, it wasn't until 4 years ago that he was able to truly cultivate. 4 years. Elder Su was once again moved. If this kid had only cultivated for 4 years and had already reached such a level, then how terrifying was his speed. Some basic skills are very important. They will be of great use to you in the future, Elder Su said. Su-yi nodded. He knew that he was lacking in many basic skills. Taking advantage of the fact that Elder Su seemed to be in a good mood, He naturally wouldn't let go of this opportunity to ask for advice. Elder Su's face was cold, but he didn't reject Su-yi. One humbly asked for advice, the other pretended to be indifferent as he guided. Time slowly passed like this. At dusk, large fiery clouds covered the sky. It's about time. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Prepare well. Tomorrow is the day of the peak showdown of the Myriad Sword Assembly. Do your best. Elder Su got up and stretched. This kid will definitely do his best. I will definitely take first place. Su-yi smiled. He was looking forward to the final showdown of the Myriad Sword Assembly tomorrow. As for first place, not to mention the generous rewards, if he couldn't even defeat the younger generation of Xinjiang Gate, then how could he go to the sacred mountain one day? His gaze was firm and flashed with a red light. For Su-yi, the final showdown of the Myriad Sword Assembly tomorrow was also the first time he had truly tested himself since the barbarian demon forest. You will definitely take first place. You have some arrogance, but I don't know how strong you are. Elder Su faintly rolled his eyes at Su-yi. He knew a thing or two about the strength of the younger generation of Xinjiang Gate. The kid in front of him was indeed not simple in all aspects, but he was still young after all, and still had some shortcomings. In the future, he might be able to compete, but now it was not certain. I will definitely take first place. Su-yi's gaze was resolute. Since he was already participating in the Myriad Sword Conference, he would do his best. The night passed, and the next morning, when the first ray of light from the eastern horizon shone on the Xinjiang Gate, the entire Xinjiang Gate was filled with densely packed figures, walking out from all directions. Some of them unleashed their yuan qi, while others rode on their savage beasts. All of them were heading towards a certain place. The sky gradually brightened. Today's weather was clear, and the air was also accompanied by the fragrance of flowers, making people feel refreshed. Today was the grand occasion of the Xinjiang Gate. The Myriad Sword Assembly, which was held once every 5 years, was the true climax. The 68 disciples who had obtained the quotas would have their final showdown. Just thinking about it made people excited. Handyman disciples, outer disciples, inner disciples, and even pro-disciples had also appeared in various places early in the morning, heading towards the Spirit Sword Peak. Today's final showdown, the true climax of the entire Myriad Sword Assembly, would be on the Spirit Sword Peak. Su-yi returned to his room. Today was the final showdown of the Myriad Sword Assembly, so he did not dare to be careless. He had to be prepared and maintain his peak state. Phew! After adjusting his breathing to the best state, Su-yi opened his eyes. There was a ray of red light flickering in his eyes, and the aura on his body slightly rippled, lifting his gray robe. He sat up and stretched his body. His bones emitted a crackling sound, as if they were filled with an explosive feeling. He felt the state of his body. The corners of Su-yi's mouth curled into a satisfied smile. Today would be a true test to see how far he had come. Suddenly, Su-yi's eyes moved, and with his sharp soul power, he felt that someone was coming. Big Brother Su-yi. Immediately, Su Jiehui's voice came from the door. Su-yi walked out of the courtyard and saw Su Jiehui. She seemed to be preparing for today. Today, the little girl had changed into a light blue robe, which outlined her already exquisite figure even more attractive. Her face was delicate and pretty, and her complexion was crystal clear. Her big black eyes were as clear as water, and her skin was as smooth as snow. There was a small dimple on her cheek, and in her hands were several robes and a pair of cloud boots. Seeing Su-yi, Su Jiehui showed a bit of shyness and said, "I see that your robe is already torn. Today we are going to the Spirit Sword Peak, so it would be better to clean it up a bit. I guess I made 2 sets for you. Try them on and see if they fit. If the size is not right, we can change them." "Thank you." Su-yi smiled and did not refuse. The robe he was wearing really could not be worn anymore. He took the robe from Su Jiehui's hands and went back to his room to change. A moment later, Su-yi walked out again. He was wearing a blue robe embroidered with some exquisite patterns, and a pair of cloud boots. They fit him very well, as if they were tailor-made. Su-yi liked them very much, and it was his favorite blue color. It seemed that Su Jiahui, this little girl, had put a lot of thought into them. A blade and a sword alternated on his back. His black hair swayed slightly. His face was sharp and resolute, and his eyes were resolute. He looked at Su Jiahui and said, "It fits very well, thank you." Looking at Su-yi, Su Jiahui's eyes were a bit dazed. It turned out that this guy, whose fierce reputation spread far and wide, after dressing up a bit, was actually so handsome. Hearing Su-yi's voice, Su Jiahui came back to her senses. She smiled at Su-yi and said, "No need to thank me. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid we wouldn't have been able to walk out of the battlefield of 10,000 swords. If there's anyone to thank, it should be us." Su Jiahui was very clear that the reason she and Zhang Qing had their current cultivation and transformation was all because of Su-yi. All kinds of opportunities and good fortune could change their lives. "Don't be so courteous." Su-yi smiled. Looking at this girl in front of him, she was becoming more and more like Wan-er. After being out for so long, he did not know how Wan-er was doing. At this moment, his heart was also somewhat worried. Gee! There was a shrill sound. Not far away, a vicious bird flapped its wings and flew over, circling at a low altitude. Gale Golden Eagle! Su-yi was surprised. It was the Gale Golden Eagle that he had brought back from the torture chamber disciple. He originally thought that it would eventually return to the torture chamber, but he did not expect it to come back. "We should go. Everyone is waiting for you," Su Jiahui said to Su-yi. Today they were all going to Lingjian Peak, so they could not be late. Su-yi nodded. After Su Jiahui left, it only took a short while for them to arrive at the place where Zhang Qing, Lu Ji, and the others were waiting. Expositive. P version A hair. Chapter 523. Boss Su-yi. There were more than a dozen outer disciples present. When they saw Su-yi, they also greeted him warmly, following Zhang Qing and other greetings. Su-yi knew these disciples. They were all outer disciples of the 36th Sword Peak, including Zhang Qing and Wang Fan. However, he had never met them in the battlefield of 10,000 swords. Later, when the exit was opened, they did not walk out. Finally, they were taken out by the experts of Xinjian Gate. Every time the Myriad Sword Conference was held, there would be disciples who could not walk out of the battlefield of 10,000 swords by themselves. They needed to be taken out by the experts of Xinjian Gate. When these disciples saw Su-yi, they were enthusiastic and excited, but also very regretful. They had all heard about the news of Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, Wang Fan and others. They also felt the aura of Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui and others skyrocketing. They knew that Zhang Qing and others had been with Su-yi and were protected by Su-yi. Along the way, they had endless opportunities and their progress was beyond imagination. However, they did not have that kind of luck. It was very regretful. Su-yi nodded to the crowd. Originally, he was worried that these disciples would have some accidents in the battlefield of 10,000 swords. Now it seemed that it was not bad. At least, there were no major accidents. "Let's go. Elder Su should not go to Lingjian Peak," Su Jiahui said. Although there were several duels in the 36 Sword Peaks today, with Elder Su's character, he would not go to Lingjian Peak. Su-yi was just wondering whether Elder Su would go with them. It seemed that he would not go. After a while, Su-yi called the Gale Golden Eagle that had been following behind him. He took Zhang Qing and a dozen other people to Lingjian Peak. Lingjian Peak had always been the place where Xinjian Gate held grand events. Usually, the grand events and duels between disciples were held on Lingjian Peak. It was said that the Lingjian Peak was protected by a strong person. No matter how strong one was, they could not destroy it. There were 72 peaks in Xinjiang Gate, including Tianjian Peak, Zhangjian Peak, Lingjian Peak, 15 Xianjian Peak, 18 Daojian Peak, and 36 Sword Peak. The Sky Sword Peak was the main peak of the Xinjiang Gate. The Hidden Sword Peak was the place where the Xinjiang Gate collected martial skills, sword techniques, and treasured swords. The 15th Mysterious Sword Peak was filled with the energy of heaven and earth. It was the place where the senior disciples of the Xinjiang Gate cultivated. The 18 Sword Mountains had always been very mysterious. It was said that the 18 mountains were occupied by the top experts of the Xinjiang Gate. Occasionally, only the direct disciples of the Xinjiang Gate could be summoned to cultivate in seclusion. Wow, looks like it's going to be very lively today. On the back of the Zephyr Golden Eagle, Zhang Qing looked at the densely packed divine sword sect's disciples on the mountain path below. Just like the many divine sword sect's disciples who were riding on flying savage beasts in the sky, he couldn't help but click his tongue. Of course it's going to be lively today. This is a grand event that only happens once every 5 years. I heard that many senior brothers and sisters, as well as some disciples of the Xinjiang Gate who were outside, will also return, Lu Ji said. Cool Craftsman Net T /positive S edition. Today is the duel between the strongest disciples of our batch. They are all God's favored ones. At that time, I'm afraid that the ranking on the Sword Pagoda will be rearranged on a large scale. I just don't know who will win the first place in the end. Tan Chao was looking forward to it with excitement. The final duel was directly linked to the ranking on the Sword Pagoda. At that time, the ranking on the Sword Pagoda would have new changes. Maybe the first place will be Sui. Ryugan River and Yunlingfeng are very strong, but Sui is also stronger, Zhang Qing said. If it was a month ago, Zhang Qing would definitely not believe that Sui could be compared with disciples like Ryugan River and Yunlingfeng. But now, he did not think so. With Suyi's means and ability, he definitely had the strength to compete. Of course, Sui has a lot of hope today. Tan Chao, Wang Fan, Lu Ji, and the others all agreed. They felt that Sui had the strength to compete. Zhang Qing, Lu Ji, and the others had been in the mysterious space all this time. They did not see what Sui and Situmuyang had experienced and done later. Otherwise, they would not only feel that Sui had the strength to compete. Sui did not say anything. He smiled slightly. Although Sui had been reincarnated, he was still a young man in his previous life. Although he was 3 or 4 years younger than those personal disciples in this life, Sui had the mentality of his previous life. At this moment, for no reason, he had the heart to compete. Today's grand event was a grand event for young people. At the age where they were full of vigor, Sui also began to feel the blood in his body boiling. Brother Sui, how confident are you? Su Jiahui looked at Sui curiously with her clear eyes. I said that I must take first place. The points you gave me back then will be returned to you 100-fold. Sui said with a smile. Back then, he had borrowed Su Jiahui's points to go to the Divine Sword Cliff to comprehend. He had once said that he would repay her 100-fold. You must take first place. Hearing this, Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, and the others felt helpless when they saw the confidence in Suyi's eyes. Boss Sui was really arrogant. Did he really think that abnormal people like Ryugan River and Yunlingfeng did not exist? The points you gave me have already exceeded 10,000 times. Su Jiahui said to Sui. Back then, Sui had only used a few points. Just the sword-pattern stones that Sui gave her in the end were worth a huge amount of points from the Xinjiang Gate. The points from a dozen sword-pattern stones were already more than 100 times or even 1,000 times the point. The most important thing was that what Sui gave her in the myriad sword battlefield was not something that could be exchanged with points. Boss Sui, with your strength, even if you can't take first place, you will definitely be able to enter the top 10. Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, and the others said. They were afraid that Su Yi would be embarrassed if he did not take first place, so they wanted to give Su Yi a way out first. More than 10 people chatted as they went to the Lingjian Peak. Then, from Zhang Qing and the others, Su Yi also learned the original ranking on the Sword Pagoda. There were many people on the Sword Pagoda, and Su Yi paid attention to the top 10. Qin Fang ranked 10th in the Sword Pagoda. Zhang Lingyun ranked 9th in the Sword Pagoda. Jiang Shiwen ranked 8th in the Sword Pagoda. Nan Linran ranked 7th in the Sword Pagoda. Gong Qi ranked 6th in the Sword Pagoda. Sakura Asaka ranked 5th in the Sword Pagoda. Gu Qinyu ranked 4th in the Sword Pagoda. Luo ranked 3rd in the Sword Pagoda. Yun Lingfeng ranked 2nd in the Sword Pagoda. Ryugan River ranked 1st in the Sword Pagoda. Su Yi knew a few of these 10 people. He had been in contact with them before, such as Zhang Lingyun, Gong Qi, Sakura Asaka, and Yun Lingfeng. It's Su Yi. And Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Lu Ji. There were flying savage beasts flying around. When the disciples saw Su Yi and the others, their eyes changed, and they started to discuss. They seemed to be talking about us. Zhang Qing was a little excited. Once upon a time, she dreamed that one day she would become the focus of attention among the disciples of the Xinjian Gate. She did not expect that such a day would really come. Chapter 524. Sitting on the back of a flying savage beast, they looked down from the top. The strange peaks were spread out in a myriad of postures. Lingjian Peak is just ahead. Zhang Qing opened her mouth, and her expression suddenly became a little nervous. Today, they were not here to watch the duel, but to participate in it. Following the gaze of Zhang Qing and the others, Su Yi also looked forward. Among the peaks, a giant peak was cut in half, as if it had been flattened from the middle. It was connected with the surrounding mountains, forming a vast square. In the distance, most of the peaks of some mountains were swallowed by clouds and mist, leaving only the peak. Looking from afar, it was like a fairyland. Rumble on one side of the huge square, there were 2 huge mountains. Between the 2 green mountains, there was a majestic waterfall. A huge stone sword, about 10 zhang tall, rushed out like a waterfall. It was like tens of thousands of roaring demon beasts breaking through the clouds. It directly smashed onto the huge stone sword, stirring up layers of huge waves. It was like tens of thousands of wild horses that had broken free of their reins, creating waves that were several zhang tall on the huge stone sword. Water splashed around, like thousands of white pear flowers blooming. It was very shocking. Screech, the gale golden eagle, spread its wings and hovered at the edge of Lingjian Peak. The senior disciples of Xinjian Gate were maintaining order, so the savage beasts could not get close. After Su Yi, Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, and the others landed on the gale golden eagle, the gale golden eagle flapped its wings and flew away, landing on a mountain not far away. At this moment, there were already many savage demon beast mounts resting on top of the densely packed towering trees on the mountain top. It's Su Yi. It's the people from the 36th Sword Peak. That's Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the other outer disciples. They got the sword pattern stones this time, and they are ranked in the top 20. It's them. The outer disciples actually got so many sword pattern stones and entered the top 68. They are the same as Su Yi, disciples of the 36th Sword Peak. Su Yi and Situmuyang snatched so many sword pattern stones and gave them to them. With the appearance of Su Yi, Su Jiahui, and the others, many complicated gazes shot towards them. Some people discussed in low voices. With Su Yi's current reputation, he naturally became the focus of attention the moment he appeared. Is he Su Yi? He doesn't seem that old, and he's quite handsome. And Kulub craftsmen network in the crowd. Many female disciples lowered their heads and laughed. Many people had already seen Su Yi, but they had only seen him from afar and had never seen him up close. At this moment, looking at Su-yi, he immediately attracted the attention of many graceful female disciples. In this world where strength was respected, coupled with Su-yi's handsome appearance, he naturally had an irresistible attraction to many of the opposite sex. It was easy to imagine how attractive a young, handsome, and promising young man would be to these female disciples who had just awakened to love. With his keen soul force, Su-yi sensed the gazes around him, but he didn't pay much attention to them. Instead, he looked around. The vast square was unimaginably large, could probably hold more than 100,000 people. The surrounding auras were fluctuating, and it was obvious that a restriction had been set up. From Su-yi's perspective, he could only see a part of the square. In the center of the square, there was an empty space that had been isolated. There were disciples in armor standing in an orderly manner, maintaining order. These disciples of the Xinjiang Gate all had sharp and solemn auras. At a glance, one could tell that they had gone through a true baptism of blood. Their auras made one's heart tremble for no reason. At that moment, there were dozens of disciples in the empty area. All of them stood straight and gave off an extraordinary aura. Their eyes were slightly closed. At the top of the square, there was a high platform with many seats on it. Fresh fruits and liquids were placed on it, which should be reserved for the elders who came to the scene today. At this moment, the sun was high in the sky. Many disciples had arrived at the Lingjian Peak. There were no less than 40,000 to 50,000 people. The lively and noisy voices were all talking about today's final showdown. The voices converged into a sound wave that went straight to the sky. In such an atmosphere, Su-yi's blood could not help but boil a little more. The square of the Lingjian Peak, which was surrounded by mountains on all sides, was simple and modeled. The huge stone floor covered the entire square and was engraved with mysterious patterns. However, at this moment, the lineup of tens of thousands of people washed away the simple atmosphere and made it lively and noisy. It was full of enthusiasm and expectations. The real showdown today is definitely the showdown between the top 10 disciples of the Sword Pagoda. Some disciples were looking forward to it. The real showdown would be between the top 10 disciples of the Sword Pagoda. Today they could broaden their horizons. Don't forget that there are some dark horses. Su-yi, Situ-muyang, and Mu-yao. The number of sword pattern stones they obtained is in the top 3. A disciple said. Judging from the number of sword pattern stones this time, there were many dark horses. Among them, Su-yi, Situ-muyang, and Mu-yao came out of nowhere and amazed the world. The sword pattern stones don't represent everything. Although the number of sword pattern stones one can get represents one's strength, it can't completely represent one's strength. Otherwise, there would be no need for this showdown. The Sword Pagoda could be ranked by the number of sword pattern stones. Some disciples were more pertinent. The number of sword pattern stones obtained from the battlefield of 10,000 swords could represent one's strength to some extent. However, there were many reasons for this, and it could not be said to be absolute. I heard that the number of sword pattern stones obtained by senior brother Ryugen River this time was only barely enough to enter the top 68. Therefore, the number of sword pattern stones cannot represent one's true strength. A disciple testified that the Flowing Cloud River, which was ranked first in the Sword Pagoda, had barely made it into the top 68 in terms of sword pattern stones from the myriad sword battlefield. Ryugen River was even the last to leave the battlefield of 10,000 swords. Could it be that Ryugen River's strength was only barely enough? It said that Situ-muyang is the son of the sect leader. Someone mentioned Situ-muyang's identity. This news had already spread in the Xinjiang Gate and caused a lot of commotion. No one was surprised that Situ-muyang was so powerful at such a young age. After all, he was the son of the sect leader. At the front of the crowd stood many young disciples of the Xinjiang Gate. They were all between 25 and 30 years old. They were all disciples of the previous batch of disciples of the Xinjiang Gate, but they still stayed in the Xinjian Gate to cultivate. These disciples were also attracted by such a grand event. They wanted to see how strong this batch of junior brothers and sisters were. That Mu Yao's identity is not simple either. It's said that she is the personal disciple of a grand elder. Her seniority is very high, even higher than the sect leaders, a senior disciple said. Some of the older disciples whispered. They had been in the Divine Sword sect for a long time, so they knew a lot more than this batch of disciples. Chapter 525. If Su Yi is also Elder Su's disciple, then his seniority is the same, even higher than the sect leader. That's interesting. There was a lot of noise and excitement everywhere, and all kinds of discussions could be heard. Many disciples even privately opened a gambling house, betting on the ranking of the 68 disciples who would enter the final showdown of the Spirit Sword Peak. The odds were different. Of course, most of the bets were placed on Ryugan River, Yun Lingfeng, and the others. Su Yi, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the others landed on the Gale Golden Eagle and looked around, shocked by the noisy atmosphere. Looking at the original L Chapter G today, their identities were different. Coming to such a place, under the influence of such an atmosphere, they all felt their blood surging. Especially Zhang Qing and the others, they were also one of the protagonists today. They knew that their strength was not enough, but at this moment, under the influence of such an atmosphere, they also had the courage to fight with the best of the direct disciples. Su Yi, we can go to the center first. Zhang Qing, Lu Ji, and the others glanced around, and after the shock in their eyes, they said to Su Yi. They came to participate in the showdown today, so they could go to the center of the square first. In the center of the square, there was an empty square that was separated. Only the 68 disciples who participated in the final showdown of the Myriad Sword Conference could enter. As for the onlookers, they could only watch from the surroundings. Su Yi nodded, and then went to the center of the square with Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, and the others. As for the other outer disciples, they could only watch from the outside. It's Su Yi and the others. A group of people shuttled through the crowd. In the crowded square, when the disciples saw Su Yi and the others, they immediately made way for Su Yi and the others to pass through without hindrance. However, in the crowd, many eyes were staring at Su Yi with anger. The owners of these angry gazes were all personal disciples and inner disciples. This time, in the Myriad Sword battlefield, practically all the inner court disciples had been plundered by Su Yi. Naturally, their gazes towards Su Yi would not be kind. Su Yi held his head high and puffed out his chest, ignoring the gazes around him. In any case, he had already left the Myriad Sword battlefield, so these fellows could not do anything to him. Passing through the crowd in the square, Su Yi, Su Jiahui, and a few others also arrived at the spacious and isolated square. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the isolated square was actually not small. The square was circular in shape, and there were 16 ancient stone platforms that were arranged in a picturesque manner. Each of them had an area of several hundred feet. As far as the eye could see, there were 16 ancient stone platforms standing in a disorderly manner. It was a shocking sight. At this moment, there were already dozens of young men and women standing in the square. They had extraordinary auras and stood quietly with their eyes slightly closed. Sensing that someone was approaching, some of them opened their eyes slightly to take a look. When they saw that it was Su Yi, their eyes flickered. However, there were even more people who did not waver. Their eyes were still slightly closed as they rested. Su Yi felt a cold gaze. Looking in the direction of the source of the gaze, he raised his eyebrows slightly when he saw the owner of the gaze. The owner of the gaze was none other than Gong Qi, who was ranked 6th in the Sword Pagoda, with a cold glint in her phoenix eyes, as if she wanted to kill someone with her gaze. Beside Gong Qi was the beautiful Sakura Asaka, who was also glaring fiercely at Su Yi. Later, we will have a duel on this platform. When they arrived at the small square, Zhang Qing, Lu Ji, and the others became even more excited and nervous. Later, they would have a duel on these stone platforms. Being able to ascend these stone platforms represented a kind of honor and identity. Su Yi did not pay attention to Gong Qi and Sakura Asaka. It was better to stay away from these women. Sweeping his gaze across his surroundings, he saw quite a few figures that he had seen in the myriad sword battlefield in this isolated plaza. Then, Sui closed his eyes and began to wait. It seemed that the final duel of the myriad sword conference would take a while. There was no doubt that the atmosphere around the square, and Su-Yi was at an age where he was full of vigor. Although his mental state was far better than his peers, his blood was boiling in his body. Young people were all somewhat arrogant and unruly. On such an occasion, they should compete to see who was better. If it had to be said that it was a kind of arrogance and rudeness, it was also the frivolity of young people. If one was not frivolous, it would be a waste of youth. Time passed slowly in the bustle. More and more people arrived at the Lingjian Peak, and it became more and more lively. It's senior brother Nanli Ran. Senior brother Oluo is here too. On the isolated square, there were figures approaching from time to time. They were all disciples who could participate in the final duel of the Myriad Sword Conference. Usually, any one of them was a well-known figure in the Xinjian Gate. Their appearance at this moment could cause a lot of commotion. Su-Yi closed his eyes. Through his soul power, he felt the aura of these outstanding young people. However, he did not open his eyes and maintained his state. Senior brother Yunlingfeng, he's also here. In the crowd, the commotion reached a new height. The appearance of a young man in white caused a stir in the crowd. The male disciples' eyes were full of awe. Many female disciples' eyes rippled and their hearts were moved. The young man in white had a delicate and indifferent face. Under his long eyelashes, his eyes shone brightly. His skin was as white as a woman's, and he had an unusual handsomeness. Yunlingfeng is very strong. His future is limitless. In the crowd, there were many older disciples who were discussing. Such a junior brother, even in their batch of disciples, was probably not to be outdone. Su-Yi felt a cold stare directed at him from the side. He opened his eyes slightly and looked in the direction of the stare. The owner of the gaze was Yunlingfeng from the 15th Sword Peak, whom he had met several times before. The grudge between him and the 15th Sword Peak was quite deep. Su-Yi guessed that Yunlingfeng wanted to find trouble with him in the Myriad Sword battlefield because he had dealt with several disciples of the 15th Sword Peak. In the Myriad Sword battlefield, Su-Yi had not fought with Yunlingfeng directly. It was not because he was afraid of him, but because there were too many pro-disciples in the Myriad Sword battlefield. At this moment, Su-Yi was not worried on the Lingjian Peak. If he encountered Yunlingfeng, he could test it out. Yunlingfeng walked onto the square and his gaze only lingered on Su-Yi for a short while. He knew that Su-Yi had some skills, but he was still not his real opponent today. However, if he met him today, he could take the opportunity to let him know that in the face of absolute strength, all unorthodox methods were useless. Senior brother Ryugan River is here. Suddenly, the crowd became restless again, and a young man appeared in the middle of the square. Chapter 526. Su-Yi's gaze immediately landed on the youth. His appearance was clear and bright, and his eyes were bright and lively. He gave off a feeling of being bathed in the spring breeze. As if sensing Su-Yi's gaze, the youth looked back at Su-Yi and actually nodded slightly. Then, he stood to the side, as if everything around him had nothing to do with him. Chi-Chi, two cold gazes shot over like swords. Su-Yi's eyes immediately moved, and a familiar figure appeared in his vision. Her orange clothes fluttered, and her figure was graceful. However, that gaze was filled with coldness. Who else could it be other than Mu Yao? 4 pairs of eyes met, and the light in Mu Yao's eyes became even colder. She glared fiercely at Su-yi. Su-yi smiled bitterly to himself. This woman was really like a vengeful spirit. He didn't know why she kept following him. On Mu Yao's body, Su-yi's spiritual perception had always felt an unfathomable feeling. I see that there are quite a few women here who seem to be interested in you. A faint voice with a hint of childishness entered Su-yi's ears. Then, a slightly immature face appeared in front of Su-yi. It was Situ Muyang. Today, Situ Muyang had changed into a tight black robe. His figure was slender, and although he wasn't very old, he emitted a heroic spirit. He had sword-like eyebrows, phoenix-like eyes, a straight nose, and thin lip. His clear gaze didn't seem to contain a trace of distracting thoughts or vulgarity. However, at this moment, his gaze swept over Mu Yao, Sakura Asaka, and Gong Qi. In the end, Situ Muyang's gaze was somewhat sympathetic as he looked at Su-yi. What does a little brat know? Su-yi rolled his eyes at Situ Muyang. I think those women are definitely interested in you. You have to be careful. My father told me that the more beautiful a woman is, the more difficult it is to provoke her, Situ Muyang said, kindly reminding Su-yi. Su-yi raised his eyebrows. From the looks of it, Sect Master Sita Luyun was also someone with a story. Right, are you really Elder Su's disciple? Situ Muyang suddenly asked Su-yi. This, Su-yi's expression did not change. He was indeed not Elder Su's disciple, but this little guy was after all the son of the sect leader. If he said that he was not Elder Su's disciple and the news spread out, he was afraid that there would be some trouble. Boss Su-yi is of course Elder Su's disciple. Zhang Qing secretly gritted his teeth and said. The fact that Su-yi was not Elder Su's disciple could not be spread out. Yes, Boss Su-yi is of course Elder Su's disciple. Lu Ji and the others saw that Zhang Qing had also said this, and immediately nodded in agreement. So you really are Grand Teacher's disciple. Hearing this, Situ Muyang raised his eyebrows. He looked at Su-yi with an expression of helplessness. Immediately, he was not particularly willing, but he straightforwardly bowed and said, Greetings, young Marshal Granduncle. Young Marshal Granduncle. Su-yi was somewhat astonished. You are my Grand Teacher's disciple. According to seniority, you are naturally my Marshal Granduncle. But you are not much older than me, so it is better to call you young Marshal Granduncle. Situ Muyang was somewhat aggrieved. Originally, he wanted to fight with this guy after coming out. Who knew that this guy was actually Grand Teacher's disciple and his own Marshal Granduncle? He was only a few years older than him, but he was 2 generations older than him. This was too much of a loss. Brother Su-yi, Elder Su's identity is somewhat special. He is the Marshal Granduncle of the sect leader, so, looking at the astonished look on Su-yi's face, Su Jiahui explained. Although Elder Su was in the 36th Sword Peak, his seniority in the Xinjian Gate was not ordinary. Even if the sect leader saw him, he had to call him Marshal Granduncle. Is that so? Su-yi suddenly understood. No wonder when he first came to Lingjian Peak, those elders' faces changed when they heard that he was Elder Su's disciple. 3 days ago, on Lingjian Peak, when they saw Elder Su appear, the elders were in awe. It turned out that Elder Su's seniority in the Xinjian Gate was so high that he was the Marshal Granduncle of the sect leader. Hey, you don't have to salute me in the future. Su-yi smiled at Situ Muyang. He was a little guilty. After all, he was not Elder Su's disciple, but this little guy was the son of the sect leader. This seniority still needs to be calculated clearly. You have to respect your teacher. Situ Muyang looked very serious. He looked up at Su-yi and stretched out a hand in front of Su-yi. What are you doing? Su-yi asked doubtfully. What do you think? I saluted you and called you Marshal Granduncle. You can't let me suffer a loss. Situ Muyang rolled his eyes at Su-yi. Su-yi, young sect leader, seems to want to change the salute. Zhang Qing raised the corner of his mouth and reminded Sui. Change the salute. Looking at Situmuyang's outstretched hand and looking at his eyes that seemed to be free of distracting thoughts, Sui's eyes could not help but twitch. What martial granduncle? This little guy clearly wanted to take advantage of him. I'll change the salute later. Helplessly rolling his eyes at Situmuyang, Sui knew that he was being taken advantage of, but there was nothing he could do. That's fine, but I'm afraid the salute is too light and will not match your status. Situmuyang smiled in satisfaction and withdrew his hand. He knew that all of Sui's good things were hidden in that strange space. It was indeed inconvenient here. The corner of Sui's eyes twitched. He had to take first place in this myriad sword conference. He could not make a loss. Martial granduncle, it seems that someone is looking for you. Situmuyang suddenly raised his eyebrows and looked to the front. Two beautiful figures were walking over. Sui looked over. The two beautiful figures were Sakura Asaka and Gong Qi. Seeing the two women approaching, Sui was a little surprised. Could it be that these two women were looking for trouble again? Sakura Asaka and Gong Qi. Although the two women had different temperaments and appearances, their temperament and beauty were enough to make many young talents scramble for them. However, with the two women's eyesight and arrogance, there were not many young people in the entire Shenzhen Gate that could catch their attention, let alone anyone who could get close to them. At this moment, the two women, who were equally beautiful, were walking towards Sui, instantly attracting the attention of many people. Under the attention of many people, the two women walked straight to Sui's side. The coldness in Gong Qi's phoenix eyes did not lessen, but at this moment, she seemed to be trying hard to suppress herself. Sui, how about we make a deal with you? Looking at Sui, Sakura Asaka said with a smile on her face, her eyes sparkling. Sui was surprised. He nodded slightly and said, "What deal?" Chapter 527. In the hearts of the two women, 20 high-grade star-grade elixirs were not enough to make Sui suffer a loss. After all, the mystical spiritual fruit belonged to the myriad sword battlefield and did not belong to this guy. I'm sorry, I don't have the mystical spiritual fruit. Sui directly rejected the offer. Although 20 high-grade star-grade elixirs were not cheap, a treasure like the mystical spiritual fruit was priceless. No one would be willing to exchange one mystical spiritual fruit for 10 high-grade star-grade elixirs. Moreover, the mystical spiritual fruit's medicinal efficacy had greatly increased in the mysterious space. Sui rejected the offer without hesitation. How could he possibly exchange the mystical spiritual fruit? Moreover, if he really gave it to the two women, it would definitely be more troublesome. Sui, don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Gong Qi had been suppressing the anger in her heart. At this moment, when she heard Sui's words, she immediately glared at him and scolded him. This brat was really too much. I know you like me, but I really don't have the mystical spiritual fruit. Sui was not someone who could be intimidated. Even more so, he did not like being threatened. Not women, not even beautiful women. In terms of beauty, he had met many women who were slightly more beautiful than Gong Qi and Sakura Asaka. You. Chapter 528. You don't have to be so polite. Situ Luyun waved his long sleeves and sat down on the large chair behind him. His deep eyes flickered with a light. He unconsciously revealed a natural domineering aura of someone in a superior position. When one looked at him, they would unknowingly feel pressured. A group of elders also sat in the front row, and the accompanying protectors sat in the back row. Everyone stood up, and their eyes looked up at the figure on the high platform. They were in awe and moved, and their eyes were blazing. Only in such a grand event like today would the sect master and the elders appear together. Su Yi's gaze also fell on the seats on the high platform, and finally, his eyes fell on the left and right sides of the sect master, Situ Luyun. There were two old men sitting there, and it was the first time that Su Yi had seen them. In the 2 times in the main hall of the Tianjian Peak, Su Yi had seen many elders, but he had never seen these two. To be able to sit on both sides of the sect master, it was enough to show that the status of these 2 old men should not be low. The old man on the left appeared to be very old. He had a head full of silver hair and was wearing a plain robe. His body was so skinny that the plain robe on his body swayed like a skirt. However, his face was extremely red and his pair of black eyes emitted a deep light that was bright and full of spirit. The old man on the right had thick black hair, and his beard and eyebrows were a little white. Sitting on the chair, his thin body was thinner than the old man on the left of Situ Luyun, but his eyes were deep like a black hole, making people unable to see the bottom. Very strong. Su Yi looked at these 2 old men from a distance, and under his invisible perception, he also felt that they were incomparably powerful. Dong, as the sect master and the elders took their seats, on the high platform, an ancient bronze bell made a melodious bell sound, which resounded throughout the Lingjian Peak and echoed in all directions. The whispers and noises in the surroundings also suddenly fell silent under the melodious sound of the bell. Gazes from all directions were cast on the high platform. Following the sound of the bell, the skinny old man dressed in plain robes on Situ Luyun's left slowly stood up. His body seemed to be a bit unsteady, as if he could fall at any moment. However, none of the elders and protectors beside him believed that this old man would really fall. He is the 2nd elder of Xinjian Gate, Zhangsun Luhan. To my father's right is the 3rd elder, Wu Chaoyang. They usually don't show their faces. Situ Muyang approached Su Yi and whispered. The 2 elders were not simple. They were the 2nd elder and the 3rd elder of Xinjian Gate. Their status was above many elders, and they would only come out for grand occasions like today. 2nd elder, 3rd elder. Su Yi was not surprised. No wonder they could sit on both sides of the sect leader. Naturally, their identities were extraordinary. 2nd elder Zhangsun Luhan stood up and walked to the front of the stage. His gaze swept all around, and included all the disciples in his line of sight. At this moment, all the disciples raised their heads and looked at the 2nd elder in awe. It's a pleasure to meet the younger generation of Xinjian Gate. You are the future and hope of Xinjian Gate. The 2nd elder's voice was deep. Although it was not loud, it resounded around the square, and was enough for everyone to hear clearly. A short sentence, but it made the blood of all the disciples boil for no reason. It had the power to affect people's hearts. With his eyes shining, the 2nd elder looked at the disciples around, and his deep voice continued, "Now, I announce that the final battle of the Myriad Sword Conference begins now." His voice reverberated, resounding throughout Lingjian Peak, and reverberating throughout Xinjian Gate. Boom! When the last word of the 2nd elder fell, the cheers of the crowd boiled, and the sound waves went straight to the sky. Jisi listening to the sound waves that went straight to the sky, and looking at the cheering disciples, all the elders and protectors secretly smiled. No matter from which aspect, this generation of young disciples was indeed extraordinary. The 2nd elder was also very satisfied. Looking at the boiling crowd, he paused for a few breaths, and then continued to speak with a smile in his eyes. The rules of the final battle are the same as in previous years. 68 disciples who have obtained the quota will fight for the battle stage until there is only one master on each of the 16 battle stages. Then, the 16 battle stages will be combined, and the remaining 16 people will have to rely on luck to face their opponents, until the final winner is the champion. The champion of this Myriad Sword Conference will also receive the supreme benefits and rewards of Xinjian Gate. Supreme benefits and rewards. Boom! The entire place was filled with excitement as their gazes burned with passion. The divine sword's sex, boundless benefits and rewards were irresistible to everyone present. However, most of them were not qualified to compete. While they were envious, they were also quite satisfied to be able to witness the birth of the champion of today's Myriad Sword Conference. Supreme benefits and rewards. Su Yi's eyes moved. Supreme benefits and rewards were one of the main reasons for participating in this Myriad Sword Conference. Looking at the boiling crowd, the second elder continued to speak with a smile in his voice. Of course, the 16 disciples who can stand on the battle stage in the end will also have their own rewards. The ranking will be based on the time of defeat. The higher the ranking, the higher the reward. However, the disciples who participate in the final battle must pay attention. It is forbidden to deliberately kill during the battle. Those who admit defeat or fall off the battle stage will be considered as the loser, and the winner will not be allowed to continue to attack. Those who violate the rules will be disqualified and punished severely. Those who violate the rules will be crippled of their cultivation and expelled from the sect. Remember this. When the second elder's voice fell, his thin body also swayed back and forth, as if he was about to fall down and sit back down. Now, the 68 disciples who have obtained the quota can prepare. When the bell rings again, you can go on the stage to battle. Understood. Protector Ho Changming had unknowingly walked to the front of the stage. His voice was mixed with Yuan Qi, and it was also clear in the noisy crowd. It was enough for all the disciples present to hear him clearly. This kind of strength was enough to prove that he was not ordinary. Understood. In the inner field, the disciples who participated in the final battle nodded in response, their voices sonorous and powerful. If that's the case, then get ready. Ho Changming opened his mouth with a smile on his face. Recently, he was in a good mood and seemed to be very happy. His originally serious face was full of smiles recently. Dong, the sound of the bell once again, resounded throughout the Lingjian Peak and reverberated throughout the Xinjian Gate. Start now. When the bell rang, Protector Ho Changming waved his hand and suddenly fell. A sound mixed with Yuan Qi also resounded like thunder. Boom! At this moment, on the inner field, dozens of auras were released together, and the light of Yuan Qi was like a flame. Dozens of figures leaped out and landed on the 16 huge, ancient stone platforms that were arranged in picturesque disorder in the inner field. Chapter 529. Swoosh, swoosh in the inner field, one figure after another leaped onto the quaint stone platform, their auras bursting out. They were all wrapped in Yuan Qi light, afraid that someone would beat them to it. There were only 16 stone platforms out of 68 people. The competition was fierce. Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, Lu Ji, Tan Chao, and Wang Fan knew their strength. They were afraid that they wouldn't be able to fight to the end, but they had to at least get onto the battle platform. When they thought about it, they would remember that they had fought with the best of the best among the direct disciples. Some people quickly got onto the battle platform, but there were also some who were indifferent and were secretly watching. Yun Lingfeng, Gu Qinyu, Gong Qi, Mu Yao, Nan Liran, and the others who had been ranked at the top of the Sword Pagoda rankings didn't seem to be in a hurry. They were secretly observing. Swoosh, swoosh, however, very quickly, the remaining figures also leaped up one after another and ascended the stage. Those who had been ranked at the top of the Sword Pagoda rankings deliberately avoided standing on the same battle platform. When two strong contenders fought, one was bound to lose. Their goal was to at least get into the top 16. Even if they were confident in winning, they didn't want to encounter too strong an opponent and consume too much of their energy. The closer they got to the end, the stronger their opponent would be. If they consumed too much energy at the beginning, they wouldn't be able to support themselves at the end. Bang! Bang! On the 16 battle platforms, As the disciples who were ranked at the top of the Sword Pagoda rankings got onto the battle platform, the others tacitly began to join forces to attack the disciples who were ranked at the top. But this kind of joint attack was definitely not 100% successful. Once there was a chance, everyone would attack without hesitation. After all, this was related to the ranking. The atmosphere on the battle platforms was already tense. As someone attacked, it was as if a series of bombs had been detonated. Suddenly, all the battle platforms were filled with surging yuan qi. The battle was on the verge of breaking out. "Kid, you don't deserve to be here." On the battle platform not far away, a direct disciple shouted softly. His figure flashed like lightning and directly appeared in front of Zhang Qing. The direct disciple clenched his fist tightly, and the fist in his hand had already arrived in front of Zhang Qing. The faint black earth attribute yuan qi caused the surrounding space to tremble, and a whistling sound could be heard in the air. Zhang Qing unsheathed his sword at this speed, but he didn't even have the chance to attack. He hurriedly retreated in a panic, reducing some of the force. However, his chest was also hit by a punch. His body was immediately sent flying out of the arena. Bang, bang, bang. Almost at the same time, Tan Chao, Lu Ji, and Wang Fan were also attacked by their opponents and thrown off the stage. Several people were smashed into the inner area one after another, spitting out blood. They were not a match for him at all. Those disciples who were able to obtain a spot were at least at the third or fourth level of the origin spirit stage. Although Tan Chao, Zhang Qing, and the others had made astonishing breakthroughs in the past month, their bodies had been tempered and transformed from the inside out. However, in such a short period of time, they were still far from being able to compare with these direct disciples. Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, Wang Fan, and the others were too weak. The direct disciples on the arena could not be bothered to team up with Zhang Qing and the others. They also disdained to work together to deal with their opponents, and were even more embarrassed to be on the same stage as them. The moment they attacked, they swept Zhang Qing and the others off the stage. Seeing Zhang Qing being swept off the arena, Ho Changming was not surprised. It was fine as long as there were no major injuries. He also knew that with Zhang Qing's cultivation and strength, it was still insufficient for him to contend with the elites among the direct disciples. Qila on the arena not far away, Su Jiahui was also attacked. A woman was attacking Su Jiahui. Her jet-black hair fluttered behind her head, and her footwork was unpredictable. Her slender hand held a sword, but she disdained to attack Su Jiahui. Her left slender palm struck out. Z update V new /best #G quick unspecified currency. Su Jiahui's beautiful face changed. With her cultivation and strength, she was unable to contend against the woman, and quickly retreated. "You're just an outer disciple. You're not worthy to fight with us," the woman said indifferently. Her speed disappeared, and with a shake of her slender hand, her 5 fingers clenched into a fist. Her fist was wrapped in blazing fire attribute yuan qi, as if it was emitting flames, causing her fist to be dyed a scarlet red. With a swift and fierce momentum, she chased after Su Jiahui once again. Su Jiahui dodged the punch to her chest, but the punch landed on her shoulder. PFFF. Under the impact of a blazing force, Su Jiahui spat out blood from her red lips, and her delicate body was sent flying off the arena. Chapter 530. Bang! A blazing aura surged like a tidal wave as the fist landed solidly on the woman's body like a bolt of lightning. Su Yi did not hold back when he attacked. This woman did not hold back when she attacked Su Jiahui as well, causing Su Yi to be secretly furious. Shock filled the woman's eyes as she spat out a mouthful of blood. Her delicate body flew out like a kite with a broken string, heavily smashing onto the stage. Only at this moment did the woman understand how terrifying this youth was. He was much more terrifying than the rumors. She could not even withstand a single blow from him. Furthermore, she could feel that it was because she had attacked Su Jiahui that this youth was enraged. That's Wang Yiting, ranked 29th in the Sword Pagoda. She was actually struck down from the stage with a single blow. Su Yi really doesn't know how to be gentle with a woman. Many of the spectating disciples were speechless. Su Yi actually did not know how to be gentle with a woman. On the high platform, the elders, protectors, and sect master Sidu Luyun had also witnessed this scene. Their gazes were all secretly moved. A fifth-level origin spirit stage practitioner was actually unable to withstand a single blow from Su Yi. With their eyesight, how could they not know what this meant? Furthermore, many of the experts present were secretly paying attention to Su Yi because of what happened a month ago on the Heaven's Ascension platform. A fifth-level origin spirit stage personal disciple was struck down from the stage with a single blow, and in such a casual manner. This kind of impact was even greater for the elders and protectors present. He's Elder Su's disciple, Su Yi? On the high platform, the second elder's gaze landed on Su Yi's stage as he asked Sidu Luyun in a low voice. That's right, it's that youth. Sidu Luyun replied in a low voice as a light flickered in her eyes. To be able to reach such a level at such a young age is already rare. Perhaps this is the fortune of our Shunjian Gate. The third elder, Wu Chaoyang, spoke. His deep and dark eyes flickered with extraordinary splendor. After Su Yi shot Wang Yiting down from the dueling platform, the three youths on the dueling platform were on the verge of erupting. The gazes of the three youths, who had just been engaged in a heated battle, immediately fell onto Su Yi's body. Sword cries rang out from the three swords, as the auras of the peak fourth-level essence spirit stage were not held back at all. The expressions of the three young men turned serious. Wang Yiting's strength was obviously stronger than theirs, but she couldn't even withstand a single blow from Su Yi. Su Yi's strength was really as strong as the rumors said. They had heard of Su Yi's reputation. Originally, like many others, they had doubts in their hearts. Perhaps in the myriad sword battlefield, Su Yi and Sidu Muyang had relied on their sneak attacks and the ability to control the savage beasts to be able to run amok. It might not have been their own strength. Only at this moment did they realize that the Su Yi before them was absolutely as strong as the rumors said. The 6 pairs of eyes looked at each other, as if they had formed some kind of tacit understanding. Swish, 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 as the 3 figures leapt forward, Yuan Qi gushed out from the soles of their feet. Yuan Qi was released, and rays of light erupted. The phantoms of 2 ferocious beasts and 1 flying beast instantly formed under the feet of the 3 youths. The roars of beasts were like thunder. The Yuan Qi under the feet of the 3 youths transformed, causing their might to soar. With tacit understanding, the 3 youths rushed towards Su Yi from 3 different directions. At the same time, sword auras shot out from each of their hands. Sword auras were resplendent and sharp, as various Yuan Qi rays intertwined, creating a formidable might. Su Yi raised his eyes slightly. Hand seals formed in his hands, as Yuan Qi gushed out from his wide meridians. Scarlet light shone from his body, before finally enveloping his entire body, forming a Yuan Qi halo that enveloped his entire body. It was as if he was enveloped in a resplendent sun, releasing a blazing aura. Boom! At this moment, with Su Yi as the center, the surrounding void trembled for no reason. It was as if an inexplicable force had appeared that could affect the surrounding space. Bang, bang, bang! Swish, swish, swish. 3 phantoms of beasts and 3 sword auras, from 3 different directions, landed on Su Yi's Yuan Qi halo. In an instant, there was a muffled sound, as a gust of wind whistled out. The Yuan Qi halo around Su Yi's body only trembled a few times, and several places that were struck by the impact were dented, but that was all. Immediately, Su Yi made his move. He took a step forward, as his hair danced and his blue robe flapped. With an incomparably swift momentum, he took a step forward. He directly appeared in front of one of the youths. His fist had already been formed, and he directly blasted it out. A great momentum surged out, causing fear to appear in the eyes of the ferocious beast shadow under the youth's feet. Rumble, like a hot knife through butter, the surrounding void also trembled. The ferocious beast shadow under the youth's feet directly shattered layer by layer. Under the impact of the tremendous force, the youth's mouth was overflowing with blood, and his body also staggered back. The remaining two youths were originally in shock, but they were not weak. When they recovered from their shock, they immediately rushed to reinforce the youth. 63 The Yuan Qi transformed into a brute demon beast under one of the youth's feet roared ferociously. Its sharp claws pounced out, and the sword in its hand was like a rainbow. The sword aura exploded as it directly slashed towards Sui. The other youth's ferocious beast shadow under his feet swooped down. It flapped its wings, bringing with it a strong gust of wind. The sword in its hand also slashed out fiercely. Swish, an astonishing scene appeared. Sui came to the side of the youth, who had just staggered back. He stretched out his hand and directly clasped the youth's shoulder in his palm. Under the tremendous force, he forcibly suppressed the youth. Then, he forcefully flung the youth like a javelin towards the youth, who had transformed his Yuan Qi into a ferocious brute demon beast. At the same time, Yuan Qi swept out from the soles of Su Yi's feet. Facing the youth on the back of the ferocious beast that was swooping down, he did not retreat. Instead, he moved one of his hands, and blazing Yuan Qi of the fire attribute burst out. A terrifying aura burst out from his fist, and a violent force exploded in the void in front of him. Rumble, in an instant, a blazing and ferocious force exploded in the vacuum. The force on Su Yi's fist was visible to the naked eye, like layers of fiery shadows, rushing out with an earth-shattering force, shattering the space ripples. The blazing fire wave swept out like a shock wave, directly blocking the youth's attack. At the same time, it also scattered the ferocious beast and the sword aura. The youth's expression changed greatly. His face instantly turned pale, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. He directly fell down. Bang! Su Yi's figure appeared, and another punch was thrown out. With a muffled sound, the impact of Yuan Qi blasted the youth off the stage. Not far away, the youth who was riding the ferocious brute demon beast shadow was shocked by Su Yi's attack. He had no choice but to withdraw his sword aura. Chapter 531. Puff! The former spat out a mouthful of blood as his body flew backward. This young disciple was unlucky. He could only watch as he crashed into the beast shadow, unable to avoid it, and suffered a heavy blow. The ferocious beast shadow was also smashed into pieces. The young man fell and staggered. Qi La! A ray of red light swept out. Su Yi's figure appeared with a series of afterimages. His 5 fingers curled into a claw that flickered with red light and landed directly on the young man's shoulder. A fierce and domineering aura erupted from his body. His black hair danced in the wind, and the sound of bones breaking could be faintly heard from the young man's shoulder. "Get down!" Sui roared. He waved his hand and a red Yuan Qi radiance erupted. It swept out in all directions, and the young man was sent flying. He spat out a mouthful of blood and was thrown off the stage. There was only one last young man left on the stage. He had just been sent flying and spat out a mouthful of blood. The sword in his hand had already fallen to the side. As he struggled to get up, he saw Su Yi walking towards him. His heart trembled for no reason. This personal disciple knew that he was no match for Su Yi. He subconsciously retreated in fear, and his face was already as pale as ash. The Yuan Qi on Su Yi's body surged. He looked at the last young man on the stage. His hair danced in the wind, and his red eyes were like lightning. He took 3 steps forward and stood on the stage. It seemed that he did not intend to pay any attention to the young man. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Su Yi's stage, and they were all in shock. These personal disciples were all elites among this batch of disciples. Every one of them had exceptional talent and potential. However, in front of Su Yi, these elite personal disciples were unable to withstand a single blow and were defeated. Many of the spectating personal disciples were shocked. Originally, many people thought that the rumors about Su Yi being able to defeat Zhang Lingyun and the others in the myriad sword battlefield were probably exaggerated. Or perhaps it was because of the help of the barbaric beasts in the myriad sword battlefield that Su Yi was able to do as he pleased. However, now that they saw it with their own eyes, they finally understood that Su Yi was indeed as terrifying as the rumors said. A 15 or 16-year-old youth, who had just arrived at the Divine Sword sect, was already so ridiculously powerful. If a few more years passed and he reached the same age as them, how powerful would he be? The elders, protectors, and the others on the high platform were not calm either. "This guy is really fierce," Elder Shangguan Hu whispered in shock. "I missed it, I really missed it." Beside Elder Shangguan Hu, a sage-like old man kept shaking his head. His figure was thin, and his white beard fluttered in the wind. His kind and serious gaze seemed to be regretting something at this moment. This elder was Elder Ingdang, whom Su Yi had met in the Sword Hall. He had interacted with Su Yi before and had a deep impression of him. However, at that time, Elder Ingdang did not pay much attention to Su Yi and did not see his potential. In addition, he left the Divine Sword sect for a period of time and only heard about Su Yi after returning. Now that he had seen Su Yi's performance with his own eyes, Elder Shangguan Hu was filled with regret. If only he had accepted this kid as his disciple in the training hall. Is this kid really Elder Su's disciple? Elder Ingdang was unwilling to give up. He whispered to Elder Shangguan Hu beside him. It should be known that Elder Su had never accepted a disciple all these years. It shouldn't be fake. Shangguan Hu smiled bitterly. He knew what Elder Shangguan Hu was thinking. He also wanted to accept this kid as his disciple. However, Elder Su had personally gone to pick him up a few days ago. He was afraid that it would not be fake. Sigh, Elder Shangguan Hu sighed. Looking at Su Yi's potential, perhaps Elder Su, who had never accepted a disciple, also wanted to accept him. Bang bang bang. The battles on the 4 stages were equally fierce. In the end, only 16 of the 68 disciples could remain on the 16 stages. Only one person could remain on each stage. Everyone was an opponent. Those who were slightly weaker would cooperate with each other to attack the strongest, but this cooperation was not absolute. Nan Linen ranked 7th in the Sword Pagoda. Her light purple robe fluttered in the wind. Her eyes were dazzling. The sword in her hand let out a sonorous sword cry. Step by step, her aura surged. She fought with the last 2 opponents, but she was not at a disadvantage. On Gu Qinyo's sharp eyebrows, his eyes flickered with a scarlet color, as if flames were flickering. The sword in his hand released a resplendent light that swept in all directions. The sword light was like wind and thunder, as if a scarlet fire wave was surging, setting off waves. This terrifying aura made the opponents tremble. They all retreated, not daring to resist. Sakura Asaka, Gong Qi, O Luo, Qin Fang, and other peak direct disciples had a tacit understanding. They did not seize a stage. Their aura erupted. The Yuan Qi light was as bright as the sun. The sword light was like a tide, fiercely colliding with the opponent. The sound was ear-splitting. Not bad. Looking at the fierce battles on each stage, the elders and protectors on the high platform felt gratified. This batch of disciples was not bad. This was the Xinjian Gate's fortune. There were only 2 people on the battle stage where Situ Muyang was. However, Situ Muyang encountered an opponent. A 5th-level Origin Spirit Realm practitioner, ranked 13th in the Sword Pagoda. Situ Liuyun's gaze also fell on Situ Muyang's stage. She was secretly nervous. Fight. The former's sword light was swift and fierce, his aura vigorous and continuous. Situ Muyang was not afraid. He dodged the attack. The Wind Rider battle armor on his body flapped his wings. His aura was ancient, causing an indescribable force to appear in the surroundings. The wind whistled and pressure filled the air. Under the Wind Rider battle armor, Situ Muyang's aura rose by quite a bit. Under his powerful aura, the void trembled as he dove towards his opponent. As Situ Muyang's opponent, the youth's gaze was grave. Who would have thought that such a youth would be so powerful? He originally thought that Situ Muyang was still wet behind the ears. Seeing that he was the sect master's son, it would be fine as long as he defeated him. But now, the youth knew that he had been thinking too much. Situ Muyang's strength had reached such a terrifying level. Although Situ Muyang was clearly a level higher than his opponent, he still could not gain the slightest advantage when fighting with his full strength. Nice, let's continue. Situ Muyang's battle intent rose. His thin lips parted, revealing his white teeth. A battle-thirsty smile hung on his lips. Under the Wind Rider battle armor, his speed soared. Taking advantage of his speed and low altitude, he dove down. His body was like an eagle hunting for its prey. The Wind Rider battle armor's wings spread out. Like countless blades, the cold light was intimidating. It was as fast as lightning, and the wind whistled. Swish, swish. The latter did not hesitate. Yuan Qi enveloped him in a ring of light. The Yuan Qi in his body surged, and the sword light was like a tide. He was already going all out. Clang, 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 clang. Sparks flew, and a fierce wind swept out. The light was dazzling. Is this little guy so abnormal? Chapter 532. A smile appeared in Situ Muyang's eyes. He could see that Situ Muyang's strength was more tyrannical than he had imagined. Under such an attack, his opponent would not be able to hold on for long. On the battle stage where Su-Yi was, the last young man had blood dripping from the corner of his mouth, and was in a sorry state. He picked up the fallen sword and stabbed it into the ground to support his body. The young man looked at Su-Yi with a look of horror in his eyes. He did not want to leave the battle stage, but he did not dare to make a move, nor did he have the strength to. Whoosh! Below the battle stage, a figure rose into the air and stopped at a low altitude for a moment. Then, the figure landed lightly in front of Su-Yi. It was a young man in his 20s. Black tights decorated his muscular and well-proportioned body. A gray cloak fluttered in the wind. His facial features were distinct and his expression was cold. Looking at the young man in front of him, Su-Yi raised his eyes slightly and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. This young man was none other than Sword 11. I said that I hope to have a chance to really fight at the Myriad Sword Conference. I'm glad that you've come this far. I don't have any regrets. Looking at Su-Yi, Sword 11's eyes flickered. His faint voice came out of his mouth, still as cold as ever. You should go to the other battle stages. Maybe you can enter the next round. I'm afraid there's no hope here. Looking at Sword 11 in front of him, Su-Yi did not hold back. Sword 11 had not gone to the battle stage just now because he was looking for him. And Su-Yi knew Sword 11's strength. Although Sword 11 had lost last time, he seemed to have other trump cards. At this moment, sensing the aura emanating from Sword 11, Su-Yi guessed that this guy had also improved in the Myriad Sword battlefield. Last time, I didn't use my full strength. Sword 11 stared at Su-Yi. At the same time, he waved his hand and a 3-foot-long treasured sword appeared in his hand. It was still a dazzling black treasured sword, filled with ancient runes. It emitted a faint light that emitted an oppressive pressure. Buzz! The body of the sword trembled slightly, and the earth element energy in 11th Sword's body fluctuated slightly. Suddenly, the sword emitted the sound of wind and thunder, as if it was alive. A mighty pressure spread out, faintly causing the surrounding void to tremble. If that's the case, then let's fight. I defeated you last time, and I'll defeat you again this time. Su Yi's expression didn't change much. Last time, he hadn't used his full strength either. And this time, in the battlefield of 10,000 swords, the 11th sword had obtained opportunities and made progress, and he had also obtained good fortune. 11th sword and Su Yi seemed to have already fought last time. Following the confrontation between Jian 11 and Su Yi, many people's gazes were immediately drawn over. The gazes of the elders and protectors on the high platform were also attracted. It was obvious that those disciples just now were far from being enough when compared to 11th sword. This time, I won't give you another chance. Draw your sword. 11th sword stared at Su Yi. The sword in his hand began to emit a black light. The ancient runes on the body of the sword seemed to be flowing, revealing a mysterious mystery. The sword light it emitted cut through the air, causing the surrounding air to fluctuate. The last time he was defeated by Su Yi, it was already a knot in 11th sword's heart. If this knot is not untied, it will become a psychological problem. Feeling the qi on 11th sword's body, Su Yi's gaze moved slightly. He then smiled faintly and said, "Last time you were defeated by my sword. This time, you won't need to use your sword." As his voice trailed off, Su Yi pulled out a large blade from behind his back. It was out of its scabbard and immediately appeared in his hand. The large blade emitted a light. It was not ordinary, but compared to the sword in 11th sword's hand, it was obviously not on the same level. But when Su Yi pulled out his blade, many people's gazes suddenly twitched. This is Xinjian Gate. Su Yi draws his blade to face 11th sword. Is he looking down on 11th sword? Xinjian Gate respects the sword, but Su Yi draws his blade. Is he looking down on the swordsmanship of Xinjian Gate? Someone whispered. This was Xinjian Gate. Facing 11th sword, Su Yi drew his blade out of its scabbard. Was he looking down on 11th sword, or on the swordsmanship of Xinjian Gate? Okay. 11th sword's gaze was slightly stunned. This was disdain for him. As his voice trailed off, the eyes on his face were deep. A black light flashed in his pupils. The qi on his body completely changed. A sharp and heavy qi power filled the air. One man and one sword stood there, as if they were unshakable. 11th sword, you are going all out this time. 11th sword, you were careless and lost last time. That was an accident. This time, you won't let Su Yi take advantage of you. Come on, 11th sword. Defeat that arrogant guy. Amidst the heated discussion, someone shouted loudly. After all, among the personal disciples and inner disciples present, there were few who did not hate Su Yi. They could no longer take revenge. At this moment, they could only pin their hopes on 11th sword. Although Su Yi is arrogant, after all, Zhang Lingyun, who ranks 9th, has also been defeated. Although he was defeated by Su Yi and Situ Muyang together, Su Yi is really strong. It is still unknown who will win. Some disciples whispered, but they did not dare to arouse public anger, so their voices were very low. The eyes of the protector elders on the high platform, and even the head of the sect, Situ Luyun, fell on Su Yi and 11th sword at this moment. They were all very interested. The sword in 11th sword's hand hummed as he stared closely at Su Yi. A surge of battle intent seeped out from his deep eyes, covering his pupils as black light flickered. He was 11th sword. His previous defeat had already become a knot in his heart. If he was unable to defeat the young man in front of him this time, it would become an obstacle in his cultivation path. It would become a thorn in his heart. He had to win this battle. He had to untie the knot in his heart. Fight! In the next moment, a shout came from 11th Sword's mouth. Sword light erupted from the sword in his hand. Yuan Qi swept out from the soles of his feet. His figure leapt up, sword light flickered. At the same time, an aura of the 5th level of Origin Spirit Stage was completely released from 11th Sword's body. It was even close to the later stages of the 5th level of Origin Spirit Stage. It swept out with a bang. Not bad. BC Chapter #Original Version. Section F equals Sensing the aura on 11th Sword's body. Many of the elders and protectors on the high platform secretly praised him. A disciple like this had outstanding talent and a boundless future ahead of him. Whoosh whoosh as 11th Sword's figure shot out. His figure was almost like a blurry shadow. He swept from a low altitude, the sword in his hand vibrating at the same time. In an instant, the streaks of sword light turned into streaks of blurry light and shadows. An incomparably sharp aura cut through the air, causing the air to ripple like water, emitting whooshing sounds of wind being torn apart. Chapter 533. Streaks of sharp sword chi spread out, sweeping in all directions, causing the eyes of many people present to tremble. 11th Sword's intelligence has reached such a level. Some elders and protectors were secretly shocked. The 11th Sword's sword was extraordinary. Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Tan Chao and the others who had already retreated below the battle stage, looked up at Su Yi on the battle stage with a serious expression. Below the battle stage, they could feel the incomparable sharpness of the sword light. The sword light shrouded and the aura was fierce. But at this moment, Su Yi activated the sword technique in his hand, and the Yuan Qi in his body surged, and finally gathered on the big sword. Buzz! In an instant, the big sword in Su Yi's hand seemed to resonate with the faint sound of a dragon's roar, and a dazzling sword light, with an incomparably fierce posture, directly slashed forward. Boom! Ding ding dong dong! In an instant, a terrifying aura erupted, and there was a muffled sound like thunder. Along with the sound of ding ding dong dong, the sound of metal clanging, the strong wind waves collided, and the strong wind swept in all directions, causing people who looked from afar to tremble. Dang dang! The strong wind swept in, and Su Yi staggered back 3 steps. Wherever his feet passed, the ground trembled slightly, but it was incomparably solid. Chi La. On the stage UB1 but 11th Sword was not like this. His body rubbed against the ground and was shaken back several feet, and the body on his face was immediately replaced by a kind of shock. It's my turn. Su Yi was already prepared. When he stabilized his body on the 3rd step, he stomped his foot, and Yuan Qi swept out from the soles of his feet. His body was like a series of afterimages as he rushed out. Violent Dragon Whirlwind Strike. Yuan Qi surged in the meridians and gathered on the blade. At the same time, Su Yi's second move, the Violent Dragon Whirlwind Strike, was directly slashed out. The sword light rotated like an electric arc, like a crescent moon across the void. The terrifying pressure was fierce and violent, like a violent dragon dancing. The light was bright, and the sound of the sword was ear-piercing, causing people's souls to tremble. This scene caused everyone's expression to change. The one whose expression changed the most was Jian 11. The sharp power of that blade made him feel uneasy. But very quickly, Sword 11's gaze darkened. The speed and power of that blade made it impossible for him to dodge. Yuan Qi was infused into the sword, and a complicated sword spell was cast. The sword hummed, and the 11th Sword held the sword with both hands and slashed out. At this moment, Sword 11's face turned ghastly pale. It was as if all the strength in his body had been exhausted by this sword strike. This was truly his full strength. Whoosh! The black light of this sword was like lightning. Suddenly, a wave of faint black sword light surged in the surroundings, as if it was moving the void. A sword like this set off the 11th sword's terrifying might. It was unstoppable and could cut through everything. King-slaying sword art. On the high platform, some of the elders exclaimed in surprise, and their expressions changed. The king-slaying sword technique was a high-level king-grade martial skill of the Xinjiang Gate. To be able to practice the king-slaying sword technique, one must have excellent comprehension ability. Moreover, it was absolutely impossible for an Origin Spirit Realm cultivator to successfully practice it, but Jian 11 had succeeded. Among the elders present, Elder Mei Huaye was secretly smiling at this moment. He stroked his mustache, and his deep brown eyes were very satisfied. Jian 11 was his personal disciple. Although that kid Su Yi could not become his disciple, but at present, that kid probably could not beat this personal disciple of his. Clang! On the battle stage, the golden spear was ear-piercing and sparks flew. Yuan Qi light shot out violently, shaking the entire battle stage. For many of the spectating disciples, the battle stage was drowned by the strong wind of Yuan Qi, and they could not see the result of Su Yi and Jian 11. I said, "You will also lose." On the battle stage, Su Yi's shout came out, and a fierce heat wave rushed over, making people's hair stand on end, accompanied by a red light. In the red light, Su Yi's figure appeared. His hair fluttered behind him, and the corners of his mouth curled up in a smile. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, and as Sword 11's face was deathly pale and he staggered backwards again, a palm print landed directly on Sword 11's body. Bang! The palm print hit and a muffled sound spread out and a red light spread out. Puff! Without any turning back, Jian 11 spat out a mouthful of blood, and his body flew out in a straight line and fell heavily below the battle stage. Bang! The ground trembled, and Jian 11 fell together with his sword. The corner of his mouth and the front of his clothes were dripping with blood, and his face was as pale as ash. In his deep eyes there was deep shock. The crowd's expression changed, and shock surged in their eyes. Jian 11 has lost. It took a while for the surrounding disciples to recover. Jian 11 had lost. This time he was defeated in a direct confrontation. In just 2 or 3 moves, Jian 11 was blasted off the battle stage and lost miserably. On the high platform, the elders and protectors looked at Su Yi, and the surging gaze in their eyes had already explained everything. Elder Mei Huaye's expression was even more complicated. The disciple that he was most proud of had been defeated, and defeated so cleanly. In Situ Liuyun's eyes, there was a light flickering, surging in her eyes. Boss Su Yi won. Below the battle stage, Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, Wang Fan, Su Jiahui and the others were overjoyed, and were even more excited than if they had won. For them, to be able to stand here today, they were already satisfied. On the battle stage, Su Yi's broadsword returned to its scabbard, and the red Yuan Qi around his body was restrained. Such a young man, carrying a sword on his back, with long black hair that reached his shoulders, a handsome face, and a tall and straight figure, made people's hearts tremble for no reason. Defeating Jian 11 was all within Su Yi's expectations. Jian 11 had indeed broken through again, but he was only at the 5th level of the Origin Spirit stage. He had also broken through to the 5th level of the Origin Spirit stage in the Myriad Sword battlefield, and had an advantage against those of the same cultivation level. Sweeping his gaze across the battle stages, there didn't seem to be many people left, and many had already been blasted off the battle stage. Bang! Not far away, there was a muffled sound, and a figure was sent flying off the battle stage while vomiting blood. On the battle stage, there was only one youth left. The white light of his battle armor had dimmed a little, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, but he still exuded an extraordinary aura from inside out. His temperament had not changed, and there was a satisfied smile on his face. His gaze was also directed at Su-yi, and it was Situ Muyang. Su-yi nodded. He wasn't surprised by Situ Muyang's victory. As long as he didn't encounter anyone in the top 10 of the Sword Pagoda, Situ Muyang wouldn't have a problem entering the next round. Situ Muyang didn't suffer much when he fought with Zhang Lingyun, who was ranked 9th in the Sword Pagoda. PFFF, bang bang, on the battle stages, there were figures vomiting blood and falling off. Many of the battle stages only had one person left. Su Yi's gaze swept across and he saw many familiar figures. Nan Lilan, Qin Fang, Gu Chenyu. Chapter 534. Following the invisible feeling, Su Yi looked over and saw several beautiful figures, Mu Yao, Gong Qi, Sakura Asaka. There was also the owner of a cold gaze. His eyes flashed coldly as he looked at Su Yi with a faint sneer. Then he lowered his eyes, and his white clothes set off his tall and slender figure, and returned to calmness. Su Yi smiled faintly. It seemed that this Yun Lingfeng was completely staring at him. It was better not to provoke him, otherwise he would not be polite to him. Bang! The last figure on the last platform flew out. At this moment there were only 16 people left on the 16 platforms. Clang! When the last figure landed on the dueling platform, a bell suddenly rang on the spirit sword peak. The first round is over. The voice of Ho Changming reverberated on Lingjian Peak. His eyes swept over the 16 disciples on the 16 platforms, and he could not help but be moved. He said, "The 16 disciples who enter the next round can take a rest and recuperate from their injuries. After half an incense stick of time, you will enter the next round. The defeated disciples will leave the inner field." His voice echoed, and the whole field was filled with discussions. The noise was loud and clear. The whole field was in an uproar, talking about the 16 people standing on the platform at this moment. Some of the elders on the high platform were happy, and some were disappointed. Those elders who did not have any disciples who entered the next round were naturally not happy. Senior brother Ryugan River is invincible. Senior sister Gong Qi. Senior brother Qin Fang. Among the spectating disciples, there were people who were cheering for the people standing on the stage. At this moment, every disciple who was still standing on the stage was originally an illustrious existence. They had a group of followers in the Divine Sword sect. Of course, except for Su Yi, Mu Yao, and Situ Muyang, there seemed to be no one cheering for them in the whole field. Especially Su Yi and Situ Muyang, there were many disciples who hated them. "Boss Su Yi will head down first." Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, Su Jiahui, and the others said to Su Yi as they walked out of the inner area. The next match had nothing to do with them. The other disciples of Xinjian Gate came forward to help those who were seriously injured and couldn't walk out of the inner field. Su Yi nodded at Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the others, and then looked around. At this moment, the 16 battle stages were filled with familiar faces. Situ Muyang, Mu Yao, Sakura Asaka, Gong Qi, Yun Lingfeng, Ryugan River, O Luo, Gu Chenyu, Nan Lilan, Jiang Shiwen, Qin Fang. What surprised Su Yi was that he didn't expect Zhang Lingyun to be among them. He guessed that this guy had obtained a lot of sword pattern stones later on and was able to enter the top 68. There were also 3 young men that Su Yi had an impression of in the myriad sword battlefield. From the shouts of the surrounding disciples, these 3 young men seemed to be called Ouyang Ran, Xia Chongqing, and Yu Shanha. These 3 young men should be among the top in the Sword Pagoda. On the battle stage, many of the remaining 16 people took advantage of the short break to stuff elixirs into their mouth. They closed their eyes and circulated their martial arts to recuperate, striving to be in their best condition. In the previous battle, although the remaining people were the strongest, some of them were injured or at least exhausted. No one dared to be careless. Everyone knew that the remaining people were stronger than those who had just been defeated. No matter which opponent they met in the next round, it would be a fierce battle. It definitely wouldn't be easy. Situ Muyang withdrew his royal wind battlesuit to reduce consumption. He also stuffed an elixir into his mouth and secretly circulated his martial arts to recuperate. There was no carelessness on his young face. At this time, Situ Muyang also realized that these pro-disciples of the Xinjian Gate were not weak. In the distance of the Lingjian Peak, on a towering mountain, a thin figure quietly emerged. His green face and his thin, childlike figure were extremely inconsistent, but the invisible aura on his body made people tremble for no reason. It was the elder of the Suruga. He looked at the Lingjian Peak in the distance, and there was a flash of light in his eyes. It seemed that he was prying on something. On the Lingjian Peak there were shouts, calls, discussions, and all kinds of noises, which gathered and soared into the sky. Fast up clang. The melodious bell rang again, silencing the hustle and bustle. On the battle stage, many closed eyes opened in an instant, and there was a flash of light in their eyes. Boom! It was also at this moment that light suddenly flickered on the 16 battle stages. The simple and modeled battle stages seemed to have come to life. Rays of light appeared, and lines that looked like mysterious runes spread out. Their auras were vast and mighty. Rumble! The whole square seemed to be trembling. The battle stages moved in the square, emitting light, filling the air, and roaring endlessly. The 16 battle stages moved in the inner square, like chess pieces being pushed by people, crisscrossing and moving in different directions. Sui was surprised. This seemed to be some kind of magical means. Stepping onto the battleground, Sui stood there motionlessly. Around him, the battlegrounds moved and changed. Silhouettes flashed past his eyes one after another. Rumble! All of a sudden, the 16 battle stages collided with each other. Each of them collided with another battle stage and merged together, forming 8 battle stages. On each of the 8 battle stages there were 2 figures. Sui raised his eyes. On the battle stage in front of him, there was one of the 3 direct disciples called Ouyang Ran, Xia Chongqing, and Yu Shanhe. This young man looked to be around 21 or 22 years old. He was wearing a red robe, and his eyes were lowered, as if he was still immersed in the world he created. He was completely indifferent to the movement on the Heaven's Ascension platform. His slender and beautiful fingers were gently holding the treasured sword in his hand, and his long eyelashes formed a charming and handsome arc on his lowered eyelids. Sui only glanced at him. He was not careless, nor did he care too much. Then, he curiously looked around. On the other battle stages, Mu Yao was up against Nan Linran, Yun Lingfeng was up against Jiang Shiwen, Sakura Asaka was up against Zhang Lingyun, and Gong Qi was up against Qin Fang. Oluo and Gu Qinyu were up against Ouyang Ran, Xia Chongqing, and 2 of Yu Shanhe's disciples. Finally, Situ Muyang was up against Ryugan River, who was ranked first in the Sword Pagoda. For Situ Muyang to be up against Ryugan River, Sui frowned slightly. Boom! When the 8 battle stages were successfully merged, the aura on the battle stage dissipated, the light disappeared, and everything returned to calm. The person in front of you is your opponent for this round. Everything depends on luck. Ho Changming stood in front of the high stage, and his voice, mixed with Yuan Qi, echoed throughout the Lingjian Peak. The second round begins now. Chapter 535. Boom! When the sound spread out, the whole place trembled. The onlooking disciples stared at the battle stage one by one. They were so nervous that their aura surged. It seemed that they were even more nervous than when they went up on stage. Senior brother Ryugan River, go for it. Senior brother Yunlingfeng, go for it. Senior sister Sakura Asaka is invincible. All kinds of shouts erupted in an instant, gathering and soaring into the sky. Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, Tan Chao, and a dozen other disciples of the 36th Sword Peak, who had retreated from the crowd originally wanted to cheer for Su Yi and Situ Muyang. However, they also knew how hated Su Yi and Situ Muyang were. Those who hated them were all inner disciples and personal disciples, so they didn't dare to shout loudly. They could only silently cheer for them. The shouts were boiling, and the heat waves soared into the sky. The 16 people on the battle stage were all young and vigorous. They had the vanity and recognition that young people should have. They were immediately infected, and the blood in their bodies began to boil. Boom! On the battle stages, a burst of aura suddenly surged out. They were all disciples from the same sect and were quite familiar with each other. There was no need to test and be polite. Fight! Swish! Suddenly, someone directly attacked. Nanli Ran attacked. Her light purple robe fluttered, and the sword light in her hand cut through the void. A young man also attacked. Yuan Qi surged, and the sword in his hand was dark red. Under the infusion of Yuan Qi, it was like flowing blood. It was filled with a fierce aura. The sword light swept out, powerful and terrifying, and stabbed towards Oluo. "Come on," Oluo said indifferently. His face was still elegant and handsome, and his eyebrows were like sword light. There was an inexplicable power. He jumped down and unsheathed his sword. He was incomparably powerful and immediately fought with the former. In an instant, the battle stages collided. Bang, bang, bang. The energy collided, and the sound was deafening. The sound of metal clashing was sonorous. The energy was like a tidal wave, sweeping out in all directions. In front of Su Yi, the young man also raised his head. A handsome face appeared in front of Su Yi, but the light in his eyes was not to be underestimated. Boom! In a mere instant, the aura of the 5th-level origin spirit stage swept out from the youth's body without any reservation. Slightly raising his head, a somewhat solemn expression secretly appeared on his face as he looked at Su Yi and said, "Ranked 14th in the Sword Tower, Ouyang Ran." As soon as he finished speaking, Ouyang Ran stared at Su Yi. He had noticed the defeat of the 11th sword. Although Sword 11 was ranked one place behind him, Ouyang Ran had a rough idea of Sword 11's strength. That ranking had been there for a long time. If he and Sword 11 fought again, he might not be able to win again. Ouyang Ran. Su Yi nodded and smiled. "I'll remember that. I heard that you're Elder Su's disciple, but I won't hold back either," Ouyang Ran said as he looked at Su Yi. "There's no need to hold back. I won't let you win anyway," Su Yi said seriously. The reward for the champion of the Xinjiang Gates Myriad Sword Conference, this time, was said to be very sumptuous, and there were also countless benefits. Naturally, he would not hold back. "All right, I also want to personally test if you're as strong as the rumors say." When Ouyang Ran's voice fell, he had already quietly formed a hand seal. From inside his body, vigorous primordial qi surged out and formed a red glow in front of him. A scorching fire attribute aura immediately swept out and shook the void. PSSSH, Ouyang Ran made his move. With a tap of his foot, his figure instantly shot out, as if he was stepping on a scarlet glow. A blazing, fierce and majestic aura flourished. At the same time, the sword in his hand was like lightning, piercing through the void as it headed towards the space between Su Yi's eyebrows. The speed was too fast. It was fierce and fierce at the same time, incomparably swift. Ouyang Ran was definitely worthy of being ranked 14th in the Sword Pagoda. The fact that he was still standing on the arena was enough to prove that Ouyang Ran was the real deal. Not bad. On the high platform, many elders and protectors had been paying attention to Su Yi. At this moment, they felt Ouyang Ran's attack and were very impressed. PSSSH, the sword was too fast. Su Yi did not have time to dodge at all. Feeling the sword rapidly approaching his forehead, Su Yi's eyes turned cold. Yuan Qi flickered under his feet, and his figure immediately retreated explosively. Cool Craftsman Network Genuine Edition swoosh. The sword light flickered frighteningly. The air fluctuated, and the sound of wind breaking could be heard. Ouyang Ran followed him like a shadow. The tip of his sword suddenly trembled, and a blazing aura split into two. Like two fire snakes, one headed straight for Su Yi's forehead, and the other headed straight for Su Yi's chest. Ouyang Ran's sword actually had such a strange change, which surprised Su Yi. After being stunned for a moment, the Yuan Qi light under Su Yi's feet became even more dazzling. Yuan Qi poured out like a flood in his meridians, and his speed also increased exponentially. In an instant, he turned into an afterimage and directly staggered under the two fire snake-like sword lights, barely retreating to the side. Seeing that Su Yi had actually dodged his sword move in a flash, Ouyang Ran was also quite stunned. It was as if he did not expect Su Yi's speed to be so fast. However, Ouyang Ran's eyes immediately revealed a smile, as if everything was within his expectations. Ouyang Ran had used all his strength in this sword move, but it was not his real trump card. He knew how powerful Su Yi was. Being able to defeat the 11th sword had already proved everything. How could he not have a plan? At this moment, Ouyang Ran's left arm shook, and a blazing aura immediately erupted. It was as if an open flame was about to spread out from his entire arm. In the next second, Ouyang Ran clenched his fingers into a fist, which was covered in a scarlet light. The blazing temperature exploded, causing his face to immediately appear somewhat illusory under the high temperature. "I'm sorry to tell you, but this is my real trump card." A soft shout came from Ouyang Ran, who was somewhat proud and confident at this moment. A fist wrapped in a blazing aura, like a raging flame, directly blasted towards Su Yi. Seeing Ouyang Ran's action and attack again in an instant, it was obvious that he had been prepared. The surrounding disciples fell into a moment of silence, then exclaimed, "Fiery explosive fist! Senior brother Ouyang Ran was already prepared." Ouyang Ran is deliberately baiting Su Yi. His combat skills and experience are still too inexperienced. Exclamations of surprise were heard. "Su Yi, you're going to stop now." Many of the onlookers looked at Su Yi hatefully, hoping that he would stop. These people included Fu Tingguang, Fu Tingming, and the others who had been directly or indirectly trampled on by Su Yi. Naturally, they did not want Su Yi to continue to the next round. On the high platform, many elders and protectors immediately focused their gazes. "Ouyang Ran is smart," an elder praised. In a battle between two people, strength was one thing, but combat experience and skills were also very important. It was very obvious that Ouyang Ran's skills and experience were outstanding at this moment. Everything happened very quickly, and the changes on the arena happened in a flash. When he saw the fist sweeping towards him with a blazing aura, a red light surged in Su Yi's eyes, and a blazing aura seeped out from his body. At the same time, the corners of Su Yi's mouth curled into a faint smile, and a faint voice was heard from his mouth. He said, "I'm really sorry, your trump card seems to be a little weak." As he spoke, Su Yi shook his arm, and the same fist surged out along with a blazing fire attribute vitality. At this moment, a terrifying aura surged on Su Yi's fist, and it was as if there was a dazzling flame on his fist. A violent force exploded in the void in front of him, causing a blazing and ferocious force to explode in the vacuum in front of him. Walala, the force on Su Yi's fist was visible to the naked eye, and it was like layers of fire shadows. It struck down with an earth-shattering force, causing the space to ripple. Everything happened too quickly, and it was obvious that Su Yi was also prepared. When all of this happened, many people's expressions changed, and Ouyang Ran, who was originally confident, was dumbfounded. Boom! A knocked arrow had no choice but to be released. Seeing that Su Yi was similarly prepared, Ouyang Ran had no choice but to pour all his vitality into his left fist. Just as the two fists collided, the power within Ouyang Rant's left fist soared to a whole new level. The shadow of the fist was blurry and the high temperature caused the surrounding air to emit a strange sound, like boiling water meeting ice. A terrifying aura suddenly erupted from Su Yi's fist before it collided with Lin Dong's fist. This was the Fire Shadow Fist, which came from the Heavenly Tiger technique of the Heavenly Fei ancient scripture. The Heavenly Tiger technique focused on force, and with its force it could suppress all enemies. At this moment, the expressions of the elders and protectors on the high platform changed, as if they had sensed something. It took a long time to describe, but the two fists collided in an instant. Boom! In an instant, the two blazing auras exploded like flames, splashing out countless sparks. Accompanied by a thunderous explosion, circles of fire waves surged out from the place where the two fists collided. Instantly, a blazing hot aura swept out, causing the surrounding heat to soar into the sky. Even the void trembled because of it. Pwah! Amidst the blazing chi, a figure suddenly flew out. Blood spurted from his mouth as he heavily smashed onto the edge of the battle stage. His body finally slid back for nearly 10 feet as he unstoppably fell off the battle stage. The force dissipated, and on the arena, Su Yi staggered back 2 steps before stabilizing his body. The force on his body had vanished. Everyone who saw this scene was dumbfounded. Boss Su Yi, well done. Zhang Qing, Tan Chao and the rest could not help but cheer. Su Yi had defeated his opponent once again, entering the top 8. This kid has such a powerful aura. It's not a cultivation technique from our Xinjiang gate, right? Even I can't see through it. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.